is.
Do I look good in this seat?
You don't even have to say anything. Quiet. Good evening. Time being 7 o'clock. I will call the March 6, 2024 Joint Budget Subcommittee meeting to order. Note to residents, all citizens are welcome to attend public meetings in person. However, please note there will be limited space. To view the live meeting remotely, citizens are encouraged to watch the live stream on the Franklin Town Hall TV YouTube channel or the live broadcast on Comcast Channel 9 and Verizon Channel 29. Meetings are also archived by Franklin TV on the Franklin Town Hall TV YouTube channel and shown on repeat on Comcast Channel 9 and Verizon Channel 29 for those of you who missed the live meeting. To participate in the meeting remotely, citizens are able to join a Zoom webinar using the information provided below. Zoom webinar ID is 834-3950-2247. And there is a link on the agenda that you can get on the town's website. Participants must enter their full name and email address to join the webinar. Participants will be automatically muted upon entering the webinar. In order to speak, participants will need to select the raise hand function to request to be unmuted. All speakers will be required to state their full name and address, and Amy, you will be in charge of that piece of it, yes. Please. Okay, first of all, I would like to say to everyone, thank you for being here this evening. We've got a lot to cover, so I'm going to get right into it after we just go around, because I think it's important for everybody to understand who's up here and what this committee is. This committee is a joint budget subcommittee made up of the budget subcommittees from the town council, from the school committee, and from the finance committee. Those are really the three finance decision-making bodies within the community. So with that, I'll start at this end. Paul, just introduce yourself, committee you're here for.
Paul Griffith, I'm here for the school committee.
Kobe Frangilla, Franklin Town Council.
Natalie Riley, Finance Committee.
Brian Chandler, Town Council.
Tom Mercer, Town Council.
Dave McNeil, School Committee.
Melanie Hamlin, Town Council.
Kevin Sumpali for the school committee.
And last but not least, George Conley, Finance Committee.
Never last, George.
No, absolutely.
Okay, as I said, we have a lot to cover, so I'm going to jump right in. First, I want to let everyone know what to expect this evening. We have an in-depth presentation from the town administrator and as well the superintendent of schools on the preliminary forecast for the FY25 budget. The numbers we are discussing tonight, please, are preliminary and depict what the needs are of the entire organization, both the municipal part of our government and the school part of our government. After tonight, I have no doubt community conversation will begin on how to deal with a $10.1 million budget gap. Jamie and Lucas and their teams will work together over the next few weeks to refine the numbers. Jamie, our town administrator, will release the town administrator's budget on April 12th with his proposed budget for the town. No final decisions on the FY25 budget or an override will be made tonight. The first step is to understand the four corners of the puzzle, and then the community will move forward along together from there. With that as the background, Jamie, you want to start off?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr.
We
Chairman.
have a great audience
Yep.
tonight. I don't think I've ever seen the council chambers this full.
I'm so excited to get going. I might speed through the first few slides, so I eventually will slow down. But really quickly, obviously, the good news is we're here. Obviously, you just mentioned a $10.1 million deficit. There's some assumptions that will continue to change. I don't want to talk over anybody's head, so I apologize in advance if some of this information may be repetitive, but I know there's a lot of new people that are engaging in the budget debate like last summer, and the feedback I heard was that people have been learning a lot from these presentations and these discussions, and so I'm just going to dive right in, and we'll go through a PowerPoint show for a little bit, and then the superintendent's going to give some in-depth slides on the school budget, and then I'm going to close it out at the end with next steps and some dates that are of interest to the community at the end of the presentation. So first I'm going to go through the first handful of slides about revenues. Those of you who have watched before always know we start with how much money do we have. So our preliminary budget model on state aid, there are three major categories and we'll talk about them each. So the first is obviously state aid. I have some key numbers that are circled here. Every year, the governor and the legislature announce, which is a good thing, they always announce that they've put historic amounts of Chapter 70 in the budget. It's always more than last year because it's public education, it's our number one priority. It's always historic. That message, though, is hard for Franklin to hear because you hear those press releases, but that's actually not true for Franklin. And this slide up here shows that. So when you see the the Chapter 70 school aid at the top, you see a bump up of about $183,000. This is what's in Governor Healy's budget that was released in January, what's also titled H1 or House 1. But state aid is not just Chapter 70. There's dozens of formulas in there, mosquito control, a whole variety of things that go into the assessments. And that's the bottom half of this slide right here. And I highlight charter school assessment because ultimately you see in this slide that our assessments are at a far greater amount at $288,000 than $183,000. And ultimately, and I'm just making this as streamlined for everybody as possible, not to make every single formula into an intellectual discussion. We will never leave this slide if we did that. Ultimately, down here in the slide I have, ultimately in Governor Healy's budget, the town of Franklin receives a loss of about $77,000 in state aid over last year. And there's a link in here, and by the way, I will get it off the table. The slides will be up tomorrow. We'll put them on our website. I know everybody always asks, and there are some hot links in here to where you can find the cherry sheets and dig in a little deeper. But ultimately, the main factor in this is what I know everybody has heard from the school department for years relative to net school spending, hold harmless formulas relative to the declining enrollment, and the charter school assessment. I also want to point out in Governor Healy's budget, she proposed less funding for the charter school reimbursement line item in the state budget, as well as the special education circuit breaker. And as we all possibly remember, in 2019, Rep. Roy and Senator Spilka at a big forum that was well attended in Franklin essentially said when the Student Opportunity Act was passed, they were fighting for the things that would matter to Franklin. And the special education circuit breaker and the charter school reimbursement are those two key line items in the state budget that help that loss turn into a positive. And speaking with the superintendent, we are going to write a letter as a team, probably with the school committee and council as well, to advocate to Rep. Roy and Senator Roush to really make sure they're conscious of these dynamics so that when they go through the House budget process in April and the Senate budget in May, they can work on trying to lift those line items up. Ultimately, at the end of the day, by the end of July, I would anticipate the state budget will be finalized, and I would expect that loss to maybe be neutral or possibly a little bit higher, because the governor proposes amount, and then the House does more, and then the Senate does a little more than them, and then they conference it out, and usually that loss in the governor's budget will just be a little bit higher, and so I anticipate, hopefully, that number will not be a loss by the time the final budget is approved. And for those of you that watched the last few budget debates, usually when the budget is done by the state, we don't make those final corrections until November, when we go back and do a recap of the budget in November. So for all intents and purposes, we're actually at a net loss of state aid versus last year. Local receipts is our second funding source. For those of you who don't know what local receipts are, I put a few samples up here. Motor vehicle excise tax, and then a lot of the revenues that we get there are similar to what would be school revolving funds on the municipal side, such as building permits, ambulance receipts, licensing fees, alcohol-related fees, recreation fees, and a whole variety. If you look at Chapter 82 of the Town Code fee schedule, local receipts. The assumption in this budget model is that we've level funded local receipts. Why? Because as of December 31st of this year, we were just at about 50% of our projections for this fiscal year. So we're not anticipating a huge amount of growth. However, I will assume by the time April 12th gets here, usually we look at local receipts through May, quarter 1 of the year, through May 31st. And the finance team and I, Karen, Chris Sandini, the finance director, and the treasurer collector, and the deputy TA, we get together, we look at those assumptions, and we try to project out as far as we can. We wait till the last possible date. Those revenues will go up. Cannabis excise, hotel, and those fees look to be solid. In addition, there's a 4th hotel being added that will be under occupancy within the next couple months behind the Hampton Inn. Those assumptions are not in this model. So that line item will go up. It is not going to go up anywhere near the amount we need to cover the budget deficit, but little things make a difference, and so that will help. I made a mention on here just while we have the floor. The town council did approve and sign a letter to our elected delegation on the Municipal Empowerment Act, which does allow the town to raise the meals tax 1% more, as well as the hotel tax. Those are disproportionately paid by people from out of town. With the World Cup coming here in a couple of years, we really want those rates, particularly on the hotel and the 4th hotel, to go up. So we did send a full advocacy letter, and the entire town council voted in favor of that, and the letter went out this week to make sure that our elected delegation knows that this is an important piece of legislation for the town of Franklin. There are a lot of other things in that bill too that I won't go into now, but there's a section by section online that people can look at. And now the most important part, I'm going to break into 2 slides. I'm kind of working backwards a little bit here. Debt exclusions. The tax levy is probably what most people are going to want to talk about. This is ultimately what funds the vast majority of local services. This is your property tax. This is your infamous Prop 2.5. I start with debt exclusions down here on the bottom just to highlight in FY23, you can see going into 24, some of these issues are dropping off. These are debt exclusions. It's been a trend that has happened over the last few years, where some of the projects that have been borrowed, say, in the early 2000s, those projects are now coming off. And so when we look at the Prop 2.5 levy, you can't just times last year's you can't just times last year's levy by 2.5%. You actually then have to deduct off the debt exclusions, which sunset at the end of a project. Mr. Chairman, as you know, because you built the high school, those will be on there well past everybody's lifetime, probably in this room. Those will go on past
Certainly
2040. So the high school will be on there for a while. But you're starting to see in the parentheses over here where some of those debt exclusion, those payments are actually dropping a little bit. The citizens don't actually visibly see a tax break, okay? But I have to mention it. That actually shows that your tax is sunsetting, particularly on Horace Mann in 24, that came off. So that's calculated by the Board of Assessors into the tax rate. I know nobody feels like taxes went down, but it goes down just a little bit when those projects come off. I highlight on here the Tri-County School. The debt exclusion was passed last November. While the big hit of tax increase for Tri-County will be in FY27, they have actually started to tap into that debt exclusion now for the design work that you need to do to get the site ready to go out and actually borrow for the full amount. So taxes are going up a hair on the Tri-County school. And so with the debt exclusions, you basically have 3.3 million because you actually have debt exclusions that raise taxes. But the real number everybody really needs to look at is the one that's in the circle here, okay? Ultimately, as you can see, prior year levy limit times 2.5%, right on that line up there is 3.402 million. New growth, which also bakes into the tax levy, which is we are projecting to decrease. Last year was 1.1 million. For those that have watched the budget back in the glory days of the pandemic years, our new growth in Franklin was up near 1.9, 1.8 million. All of that new growth revenue loss is loss in discretionary income for the community to pay for services. I have to make sure everybody really understands that. When we have the new growth numbers go down, it's not just a dollar value that's lost, it is actually tax base that is lost. And when you lose that tax base, you lose that 2.5% additional the next year on the 2.5 on the Prop 2.5. I know people will have questions about this later on, but Prop 2.5 is 2.5%. Your revenues can go up. It's capped every year. If you want to go more than 2.5%, that's what's called an override. Override is a permanent tax levy increase. A debt exclusion is a momentary tax increase, and when the project is done, then that tax sunsets. So that's the difference. Ultimately, what people need to know is 3.264 million is ultimately in FY25 what you have for discretionary funds. And as you'll learn in a moment, most of those funds aren't actually discretionary, but that's the entire pot of new revenue under this model is 3.2 million. That's what you got. These are some of the assumptions in the expenditure slides. So I just put up here some examples. A lot of this was from last year as well. Examples of fixed costs. Everybody needs to understand that 3.2 million number is not, let's go carve it up. We got 3.2 million, how are we going to use it, right? There are fixed costs that eat away at that number right away. The first one is pension assessment and benefits. Right out of the gate is almost 700,000 of that. That's just municipal health insurance. That is not school department employee health insurance. That account is in the school department budget, as I know Lucas will speak to later. The municipal cost of living adjustment contractual obligations. You're looking at 625,000 from FY24 to FY25 just to pay for the municipal employee COLA of 2.5%. The facilities budget rose in this model 670,000. Expenses at about 411,000. The facilities budget occupies all of the costs for all school facility costs. The DPW also hosts a lot of those costs too, and we'll go through those in a few minutes. But when we look at cost drivers relative to town facilities, that's where that is. You're talking about water, sewer, utilities, gas, propane, everything down to fixing the sinks, plumbing, you name it. All of those expenses are impacted by inflation. And so just to maintain what we currently have with the cost increases in electricity and et cetera, the town is looking at a $670,000 increase. You're already in that 3.2 million number. I'm not even past the first three bullets. Half of that money is already gone, just with fixed costs. Okay, this is not like there's not a lot of money here left to work with. I always remind people about 20 to 25 million. There is a wide range there depending on assumptions you make. It's very important for everybody in the community to understand the quote-unquote municipal budget pays for a lot of school-related costs. School building debt, we pay for the unemployment compensation. If there's a layoff on the school side, the town budget pays for that unemployment cost within our side. We pay for property and casualty insurance. We pay for all the workers' comp for the schools. We pay for all the snow removal out of our budget, the non-teacher pension costs. the folks that aren't in MTRS. We pay for all the grounds and maintenance and building maintenance, the utilities, fuel and maintenance for the school van fleet. We pay for all the retired teacher health and life insurance and benefits, facilities personnel. I could go on and on and on, and I won't. I just need everybody to understand and make sure it's very clear to the public. This is why Lucas and I are up here together, because ultimately we joked at another meeting, we can't get divorced. Even if we wanted to, we can't. There's way too much in the municipal side of the budget that impacts the schools. We have to all work as a community on this stuff, because trends in workers' comp or accidents that may happen on my team or his team ultimately impact the entire pie and the entire budget. Again, I apologize for a lot of people, this may be repetitive, but I know there's a lot of new people where this may be really valuable information. Couple of other quick ones. Workers' comp is going up 11% in the model. You look at OPEB, the policy of a $50,000 increase. I know we're doing really well, according to Dan Sherman. We're in the top tier communities in the state. But as he also says, you can't take the foot off the gas pedal, right? DPW expenses are in my memo. This year, just for an example, we saw a $60,000 increase in the contract to farm out the costs for mowing all the school and town athletic fields. And that's just, if we want the fields mowed, we got to pay the extra $60,000 to the company to do them, including street lights and a whole variety of other things. People always ask me, why don't you just give the schools more money, Jamie? Just do it. This is a big reason why. If you want me to give more money to the schools, we have to work together to figure out how we're going to change the paradigms, to be creative, to offset some of these costs. Be creative on how we do that. And the municipal staff need the school department to work with us on this stuff. I can't just give it to them without either breaking laws like not paying the pension assessments, not paying municipal staff, facilities, all that stuff. I'd have to cut that stuff. So when people just say, just do it, this is a good reason. This is a summary slide. It's not everything, but this is a big reason why. So this is just a sample, and actually this is the entire list that I believe is in there. This is the discretionary spending after the fixed costs, okay? So we added into the model a sustainability coordinator for the facilities department, which is about an $85,000 salary plus benefits, is about $120,000 budget impact. We added in DPW expenses. In the memo, it spells it out. Tree trimming, cost to mow the fields. People call us all the time about sidewalk crossings, painting, trails, sidewalk repairs, street lights. I could go on and on and on and on and on, and I won't. But when you look in the list that's in the memo, that's stuff the community is asking the council and the DPW in my office almost every day to do more of. When you look at the assumption in here, it's almost $400,000 in DPW expenses that the DPW put forward in their request. And I'm just going to be honest and get a little ahead of myself, but that's probably not going to survive a final budget when you have a $10.1 million budget deficit. But I lay this out there for everybody to know. Why aren't the trees trimmed? Why does the power go up? We have to spend more money. National Grid does a lot, and we can dump a lot of that on them, but the town also has to pick up some of that too. And so I just add that up there to help contextualize the kind of discussion we're having. Board and committee investments. The Cultural Council, in this model, we added $5,000. Fortunately, we've been getting a huge turnout for grant applications from them. I know we turn a lot of grant people away. The council has been very supportive of getting that line item up to really match what the state's giving us, and it's been really, really great. But $5,000 out of $3.2 million isn't a lot, but that would mean a lot for them. A lot of additional grants to the community. We added about $12,000 actually to $15,000 for the Historical Museum, Historical Commission. We added another $1,000 for the Cultural District. Again, just a few examples of trends for conferences, expenses. The Disability Commission has a disability fair every year. The Cultural District is giving out grants now. They're doing a great job with email lists and encouraging people. Those are small investments, but we added them in just to show, what the kind of four corners of the puzzle are. And then finally, we added in this model 3 additional paramedics, which basically supports a 3rd daytime peak hours ambulance, which the fire chief can explain. But I also want to clause it by saying the ambulance receipts that are coming in help offset the revenues to pay for this. And in addition, under the structure the chief has with the amount of folks we have, you also see in this budget proposal a reduction in overtime to help fund those positions. So those are the creative things of moving money around. We have to tell that story to the public. And also, as you'll know from the fire chief being here many times, and he was in attendance tonight, it'll be in the budget model, or in the budget memo. I think we all are aware the call volume for the fire department is going through the roof. There's been a lot of stories in the press about this in the Metro West area, and obviously we saw that tragic story up in Winthrop where there weren't enough ambulances and that 2-year-old fatality up there. So there's a lot to think about on these issues. Other than that, those are all the other discretionary expenses in the budget model outside of the schools, which we'll get to in a few minutes. What's not in the budget? I won't go through the whole list. Net zero initiatives, roads, sidewalks, more parking lots, trails, mental health initiatives, athletic fields, facilities, all the stuff that people come to Lucas and I all the time to ask for. Why isn't all the capital money for annual appropriations for police and fire gear? Why isn't all the curriculum the schools buys every year, the Chromebooks? The Capital Committee, rightfully so, is frustrated that annual expenditures come back. But I think as you can see, if we added all that into the budget deficit would now be 11, 12, or 13 million. Maybe probably higher if Lucas and I really did a dive into technology. You'd be looking at it, I mean, we're starting to get to surreal numbers here. And so that's why we don't fund those things in the operating budget. And these also don't include the cost projections relative to a police station, Remington Jefferson remodel, which is on schedule for FY26. The building desperately needs an entire remodel and a bunch of other stuff that people ask. And you can just continue to add to the list with whatever you think the town needs, just add it to that list. So, schools are next, perfect. So, this is the first year, and I'm extraordinarily happy and thankful in my memo to the school business administrator, Bob Dutch, Lucas, Tina, Paula, the whole staff. They've worked tirelessly for many years now to try to get some better data for the community that revolves around school finance. You know, Lucas can verify this too. When we looked at the 4 doors, which we'll talk about in a moment, you know, basically you're looking at a 12.92% increase for the schools this year, or 9.3 million. I just gave you the other bad news that there's only 3.2 million and then some other fixed costs, but people can see the competing demands here and exactly what the challenge is going to be. And I believe the superintendent made the correct decision to put in a request. And I know the school committee is not fully through their process yet. There's a public hearing on March 19th, and the final vote, I think, will be on April 2nd. But we jointly recommended to the community to put forth the 12.92%, which Lucas will go into. Why? Because that's essentially level service, in addition to partially restoring the cuts to clubs, classroom sizes, and some of the other stuff that we've made in FY24. So I'm going to turn it over now to Lucas and have him go through his slides, and I'll be happy to click the buttons for you if you want, buddy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you, and thank you for everyone who's here in attendance. So just a little bit about us, and then I had some opening remarks to just share with everyone who's here today. So basically, for those just tuning in, many may be aware, we are comprised of 10 schools in Franklin. We have approximately 500 teachers, and there's, you see the 1, 2, 3, 4 employees. That includes all employees who work for, whether they're a crossing guard, a teacher, a principal, a coach, anyone who is affiliated and employed by the Franklin Public Schools. Those are the total number of employees. But that includes part-time folks, cafeteria workers, everyone. You'll notice here, Chapter 70 state aid is at 29 million. You will know that we have been held harmless. I do talk a little bit about that later in the slides. It was 11 million last year, it's 12 million this year, and that's money that the formula states we should be getting a lower amount, but because of the way the formula has worked for years, we have been able to be held harmless for that amount, second to Boston. You'll also see the in-district per pupil cost at 17,897. Just a little bit about me. Most people know me as a superintendent of schools, and that's my role tonight. But I think it's important to also say that I'm not only superintendent, I'm someone who was a teacher in this district and worked here for many years in the early 2000s through. I was an assistant principal at the middle and the high school level in Franklin. A short stint in another community as a principal at that time, because we had a phenomenal principal working in that role at that time, and I needed to continue to grow professionally. And when the opportunity came to come back to Franklin, I'm invested in this community. I'm also a taxpayer, and I'm also a parent of 2 children who attend Franklin Public Schools. I'm trying to raise my kids in this community, and I speak to you about the needs we have in the district because I really believe in what we're doing, and I feel as though I'm hopeful that we can all come together to get to some shared understanding and agreement about the needs. And if you can move the slide ahead, Jamie, we can move into some of that work. So as we developed this budget, where did $9.3 million come from? We really tried to look at what were our priorities. The first thing that we have noticed over time is a slow erosion. And while we've kept up with some of the enrollment-based cuts along the way, we've seen class size, if there's one thing that we can point to that has a tremendous effect on our students, is trying to have a manageable size class in every classroom in the district. There's an expectation within this community that we do that, and there's an expectation among the school committee that that's where we started when we build our budgets. So you will see when we put the budget book out officially, this year we've added every school, every grade, what the class sizes are, what they will be in this proposed model, so that people can see exactly what we're talking about, so there's no questions around, or if there are questions, at least there's answers to where we came up with that. Providing supports for students, just like every industry and I've heard it's spoken about in town around whether it's call volume. Our version of that is students who response volume. We have students who have a variety of complex behavioral challenges, needs across all of our schools, and providing some of those supports, mental health supports, behavioral needs is a critical part of the work that we do. It's not enough to just educate kids on the content. Teachers are expected to manage much more than that in today's classroom. You'll notice we're an academic institution. Teaching and learning is what we do. Investing in literacy, curriculum instruction is how we do our work. It's the mission of all schools across the country, and that's was another priority. Number 4, ESSER grant funding. It's going away this year. So any position, and we were forced, because of our budget, to put positions in ESSER funding. We knew that there was a timeline to those funds, but we also knew it was important to incorporate our school adjustment counselors and other staff into those positions so that we could continue to provide that level of service. Finally, trying to create high-quality learning environments for kids and investing in that. So you can move to the next slide. The benefits, I talked a little bit about class size. Here's the ratios we've used. Currently, K to 3, you'll notice, it's 18 to 22 is what's recommended. We have some kindergarten classrooms upwards of 24, 25 with no other adult in the room. And that's an area where you'll notice in the budget later when we get into detail, some of those requests are directly related to try to bring that number back down. Dr. Dutch mentioned this last night, but there's also an investment, it's almost like early intervention, where if you can create a stable, healthy foundation of class sizes early, and you provide teachers the right amount of kids in the room, not only do we move initiatives forward at a faster rate, we also allow those teachers to educate students and identify gaps earlier. Interventionists are included in the budget this year as well, and you'll notice some other components of it, which do include trying to provide all of the different resources we need to run schools. We educate over 4,700 kids in the district, and we're trying to do the best job we can with that, and you can move forward, Jamie. Thank you. So, how did we arrive at this? Contractual increases to salaries, special education programming. You heard about healthcare, the actual costs for substitutes, transportation, and then our grant funding and revolving accounts, which we did spend down significantly last year in order to try to keep ourselves, positioned the best we can, but it came at a cost, and it will continue to as we move forward. You can move forward. Thank you. At this time, I'm going to have Dr. Dutch just come up and speak a little bit about the increased obligations in more detail.
Thank you, Lucas. Similar to Jamie's presentation, there are some obligations that we have that are not optional. They are things that we have to commit to. So I'll just quickly go through those. We've got the contractual obligations, which total $1.7 million. The ESSER funds, we had $497,000 of staff that were funded through ESSER that now have to be absorbed into this budget if we wanted to continue providing those services. We are mandated to provide services as described in the student's individual education plan, their IEP. So we've got some costs associated with that, $2.2 million in out-of-district expenses. Part of that is a result of allowed increases by OSD at the state level for the private in-state schools. We also are finding transporting our students to these private facilities are costing us more. With the influx of students into the town of Franklin and the transiency of some of those students, we're finding that we now have to transport homeless students to other towns to go to school, or transport them from other towns to Franklin to continue their education because they've moved elsewhere. In most cases, that's a cost split, but it's still $80,000, which was budgeted at zero this year. An increase in contracted transportation, that's our bus contract to transport students here every day on the big yellow buses. Health insurance was mentioned. It's a 9.5% increase, which will cost the district $650,000. And then, as was mentioned, we went all in last year with our revolving funds, nearly depleting those funds, and that's not sustainable, nor is it a good practice. So you're going to see fewer revolving funds against the budget this year, and in addition to ESSER, other grant funds are going down, partly due to challenges the state is having with revenue. So before we think of any initiatives, we see a deficit of $6.5 million before we've talked about anything else. So similarly, you can see the challenges that we have. So thank you.
Thank you, Rob. So we put forth, as Jamie mentioned earlier, a level service plus budget model. And this takes into account carrying forth our obligations while also looking to create more stability within the district, within the costs. There was a few models, and a slide will come up later that shows multiple. And we've quantified this and stand by the request and the reasons for it. And we can talk a little bit more in detail, but it does cover the obligations we mentioned, plus partially restoring some of the things lost more recently. So just to break this down, that recommendation that was presented last night to school committee is to carry forth and retain the same levels of teaching that we have for our students into the next school year, with no cuts to the positions that we have currently. It also includes trying to bring back some of the programs which we've more recently lost, and then also trying to provide additional teachers to get those class size ranges back down into the area where we would like to be. You can move forward on that. Sure. So this is a slide that I would key in on at this point. We've put together a survive, stabilize, thrive. Anything lower than a level service budget would mean reductions. And when you look across the slide, you look from left to right, you'll notice if we received, for example, a 2.5% increase, and you carry that forward, that's $1.8 million, and that would leave a deficit of $5.5 million. So if you do the math on that, that's the number we would use to have to reduce our budget. We're a human business. 85% of our budget is salaries, teachers, administrators, different people, all those folks that I mentioned earlier today. So there's not many other places where those reductions can come from. And I looked at the data over the last 20 years, and there's some themes around where we've reduced building-based budgets along the way. We've reduced supply budgets, different areas where we have, but ultimately what it would come down to is that large of a number is obviously going to result in reductions to staff. The further the increase, obviously the less of the reduction, but if you do the math on the right-hand side, you can see where we're in a real situation where I don't want to create complete fear, but I need to say with all seriousness, this would decimate our school system if we had to make these kinds of cuts. And I think, I can't say it enough, I've received the calls in the fall from parents around classes of 24 in kindergarten. They've entered their kid into school first year and they can't believe the class sizes. And, you know, I've have a parting line that I typically go back to, and I say that we're doing the best we can with the resources we have. And as it's hard to say that, because I think we can do better. And I think that we owe it to the students, it's a collective responsibility. We owe it to the kids to do better. And I will say, I want to credit Jamie for a department head meeting we had 2 weeks ago, where he had laid this out with all department heads. And the way he framed it was, this is a large number, I need you to understand that. I want you to know that this is a recommendation based on what the school needs, but it's not to come at it shouldn't come at the impact of other departments. And you allow me to speak and just address this, and I will say this, and I'll say what I told all the department heads, is I live in this town and I benefit from every service we provide. And this is not about the pie slice being larger for schools, it's about having a larger pie in which to operate. So I just would keep that in mind as we think about how I envision this and what my hope is for this community, which I'm a part of, is to say that if we can make the pie bigger, I think we could solve some of these issues. And I just think that you heard Jamie talk in the first few slides about how much we have to work with, and there's compliance factors on each end of this, each part of the business. So you can move forward, Jamie. So I have 2 slides, one's on general ed and one's on special ed, and I'm going to give Dr. Rogers an opportunity to just hit this slide and cover these points so that we can really understand when we say general ed, what do we mean, and when we say special ed.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Good evening, everyone. Tina Rogers, Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning. So these are just a few highlights of what is encompassed in the general education funds of the school-based budget. So when we talk here about various programs and services that benefit Franklin students, we're talking about AP classes at the high school. We're talking about STEM classes at the middle school. We're talking about World Language Program 612. We're talking about art and music K-12. So those are the types of things. Also included in here would be professional learning for the 1,234 employees that Mr. Gier alluded to. The professional learning and development for those folks is also included in this. Also is the cost for staff. So salaries of educators, core classroom teachers, special subject teachers. We're talking about your chemistry teacher, your AP bio teacher, people with special certifications that you need to teach those specialized physics classes. Moving into the next bullet, covers instructional materials. We have been blessed with an opportunity to come before the capital subcommittee and have and receive funds for instructional materials, and without that, we would be in a really a much more challenging spot. But I will say this year alone in our general education budget, we have budgeted for, I wrote these down, AP Chem books, calculus books, AP Physics books, literature replenishment for middle school classrooms and high school classrooms, replacements and consumables for science. If you think about science classes, those materials can't be reused every year. They have to be replenished. So all of that exists in the general education supplies budget, in addition to classroom technology, the Chromebooks, the teacher devices, and things of that nature. Next bullet, extracurricular activities, clubs, athletics, art programs, all of those things are included in the budget. And then lastly, here you see is the transportation expenses that Dr. Dutch alluded to as well. So all of these components and more, these are just a highlight, are included in the gen ed portion.
Thank you. And we can move to the next slide. I'll comment. Mrs. Morano.
I'm just going to take this.
There we go. Sally Jesse.
Jesse, Taylor Swift.
Mr. Sherlock was shirking his.
I know, he was ready, usually he helps me out, but I took it upon myself though, Steve, thank you. So special ed. Special ed is characterized and talked about in many communities as the most unpredictable and most expensive budget item. We are obligated to educate all students in our community, whether they have a disability or not. We are morally obligated, in my opinion, to make sure that all of our students, including students with disabilities aged 3 to 22, receive the appropriate education in the least restrictive environment so that they can access their curriculum and be community members in our and supported here. So unfortunately, depending on the student's special needs, how many students we have, and the levels of services that they need, those costs can vary, and it's hard to predict them. To do the Reader's Digest version of special education, students are identified through a evaluation process, and that could start at the age of 3, and then, like I said, we are responsible for them up until the age of 22 if needed. We evaluate them, and through that we identify a disability, and then propose an individualized educational plan based on the needs of their students so that they can access the curriculum. And our special educators that are many of whom are in this room tonight and on Zoom do a phenomenal job of providing the appropriate supports and services for our students to make sure they can access their education. And it could start by just providing supports in their general ed classroom or some specialized instruction in a pull-out model. There are some students that need more intensive services than just in the general ed classroom and might require a specialized program. We are very fortunate in this community that we have 8 specialized programs that we've developed over the years from elementary school all the way up to high school. And how we develop these programs is if we have a cohort of students that have similar disability types and require the similar methodologies to access their curriculum and gain their skills, we put them together in a specialized program with specialized staff. And you will see it in the next slide. It's a really cost-effective way to meet the needs of our students. But not only is it cost-effective, okay, that's one thing, right? We save money for the town. But it is also best for our students. Not only for our students with special needs who get to stay in their neighborhood schools with their neurotypical peers that they might see at the ballpark or on the football field or at the playground, but the students without disabilities who also get to experience being accepting of students that are different and neurodiverse, and that is a life skill, and that's very important. So we did a little cost analysis for you all this evening because, special ed is always mentioned. So we just wanted to compare the cost savings for keeping our students in district versus sending them out of district. So we'll start with the top chart. This is the historical perspective of our out-of-district costs. The number of students that go out of district has fluctuated over the last 3 years. We've had a little bit of a decline this year. So you've seen that this year we've saved about 2%. Let me back up and explain why we send kids out of district. So if our students who have significant disabilities we can't meet their needs in district, because there are some students that we just, no matter how much staff we have, how skilled our staff have, how many tricks of the trade our staff or training they have, these students just can't be successful here in district. So then the team will decide that recommend an out-of-district program. And again, our teams do a phenomenal job of really trying to find the least restrictive out-of-district programs. So we might start with a public day school at an area community or a collaborative like FICO, which is next door, or Accept in Natick or other collaboratives. Or we might send them to a private day school, which is a more specialized program. But again, we do our best to keep them in district. So I did a little comparison of our in-district costs versus our out-of-district costs. And I picked Goals, Reach, NEC, and our STRIVE program. Those are our more intensive programs or with specific needs that if we didn't have those programs, those students might have to go out of district. Goals is our program for students with autism, Reach for students with mental health or social and emotional challenges, NEC is for our students with significant autism who really need that really intensive program, and our STRIVE is for our students with developmental or intellectual disabilities. And you see that by educating our students in district in our programs, it's about $48,000 per student, and that includes our in-district transportation because we are required to transport them if they don't live in the neighborhood where that program is. But our out-of-district per pupil is close to $80,000. And you can see throughout that how much money, we save almost $3 million by keeping our students in district. So not only is it a cost savings and worth the investment to create these programs with the appropriate staff, with the appropriate training and skills, but is also better for our students because they're in their neighborhood schools with their peers. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Paula. So we referenced 4 programs. There are other programs that exist at the high school and middle school level. These were just the ones that we chose for the purpose of trying to demonstrate. And I'm thinking about Mr. Conley, last year you asked me the question, what do the schools do or what have they done to try to get creative and find ways to, so this to me felt like a way to respond to that question and say, here are things, we can't do like 4 days on, 4 days off or things of that nature, but what we can do is look for things that work within our system and structure. And this is one. The other piece of this is when you invest in solid programming and you have this type of model, if you are in a stabilized environment and a stabilized budget, and you'll hear this a few different ways, there's opportunity here. We were contacted by a public school district not far from here to say, hey, listen, we have a student who may need to go outside of the district, but we heard that you have this program in district. Wow. Could we possibly work together and tuition the student in? My initial reaction was, no, we can't, because we don't have the stability we need in our in-district programs because of the fluctuation of staff, because of cuts, because of those things. But if we were in a position where we had a humming program that had a slot and we felt like we could do that, there's an opportunity there. When you invest in yourself, there's opportunities like that that exist. And a second example, when Dr. Rogers mentioned the capital program, we mentioned it, I think, at one of the last meetings, but because we have a full audience, we used the capital funding that we had, and thankfully Dr. Frazier was able to get a grant to combine with the capital money we received, and we went from paying $250,000 for a K-8 program for 1 year to being $250,000 a year to dropping it down to $100,000 a year, which included all in, because of the money up front sustained a larger program, and now we don't have to revisit that for 5 years. That's a way to commit to more long-term strategy. So, I will just say that, and when we think about grants, our director of STEM, Mr. Stark, spoke to me 3 weeks ago. We had reached out about STEM opportunities and trying to get grant money. And the one thing that came up, he received the feedback that based on the fluctuation, and when we make cuts and we try to hire back and we don't have a fully funded staff with a stabilized budget, if we're not investing in ourselves, they are not interested to invest in us. And I think if I could make that point to this group, it's around how do we create stability with reasonability and put out a number that allows us to stabilize and get on better footing. And I think we'll see the outcomes of that get into a much better space where we're not spending our time cutting and trying to rehire or hire when people leave in a fluctuating environment. I don't want to get ahead of my slides, Jamie, but so the level service, I want to be clear. Someone asked me this question this morning around, hey, how did you find the money to do the middle school clubs? This is part of that $9.3 million ask. So everything you see here does not exist. It's part of the request. So middle school clubs are not back, but they made it to the list of things that we would look to try to bring back, because in every high school in America or every middle school and district in America, it's great to have that type of environment. If you look to the left, you'll see K-2 teachers, we did the math. Anyone who exceeds the 23 in a class mark, that's where that number comes from. You'll see the strive. Mrs. Morano just talked about in-district programming. We have enough students with similar needs where we are going to be opening up another classroom in order to service those students as opposed to sending them out of district. The BCBA, that's a behavioral position to help support our teachers and our students. And ECDC, that 0.8 is actually a combination of multiple people who are already, so 0.2, to get a staff up to full time in order to meet those needs instead of having to hire more. If we just increase a few people, we can get the coverage we need. Middle school, same thing. You'll notice some special education positions. ABA, applied behavioral analysis, that's a tutor who works directly with students. And then at the high school, typo. Remember we talked about it? So there's a typo, it's not a char, that's not a slang term, it should be team chair. I don't know how that happened, I'm embarrassed. As an educator, I'm embarrassed that happened, but this has been a lot to think about. So, special education teacher, a librarian's listed there for NEASC. We are out of compliance currently. We do not have a librarian at our high school. We made a choice last year in order to try to preserve the class size. But we are basically in a warning state with NEASC, so we put it back in here as part of that request. And you'll see a teacher, that 1.0 is for the business department. We have a high interest of business classes at our high school from our students. Franklin's business program has continued to expand and grow, and we just required financial literacy for every student who graduates from Franklin High, so that they understand, I say this to my son all the time, if you understand anything in life, the good and bad of compound interest is probably the greatest lesson. And I said, I've seen too many Marines to Camp Lejeune who bought a Mustang, who had a repoed, and I don't want you in that boat. And at any rate, that idea and that concept can't be understated. It's relevant to tonight, too. So when we look at that, you'll also see digital learning integrations. Why they were reduced and cut as part of cuts from last year. We have had a district-wide implementation, thanks to some capital funding as well, for the touch view screens. The projectors at the high school, I think there's currently 28 that were in a repair mode. We have done K through 8. Every school has touch view screens, which is a more sustainable product. It takes training, it takes support in order for our teachers to have the skills and training they need to do that. And the next stage is the high school. So we implemented those. This year we did not implement any because we finished it the year before. And now the request is not only to support that, but there were many parts of that role that we are looking to reinstate where those folks would take that on. So just to be clear. And the last thing I'll say on this slide is on the right-hand side. There are some things that eventually over time start to go. It's detailed for a slide. I don't want to get in the weeds, but there are some supplies you'll see on there. And then middle school programming. We've heard from the community, particularly middle school families, around the absence of clubs and activities, and it made sense that as part of this big picture to include that in this budget. So here's what's not listed as an ask. It's what we currently have. Sometimes people say to me, wow, you guys do so well. Our boys basketball team's playing right now. I think they were up by a lot at halftime. That's why my watch keeps going off. But it's telling me to stand at this point, too. At any rate, when we stabilize the budget, in all seriousness, this is about preserving what we have. And no, we don't want to see further erosion. And I think we're on this island, and then when the water starts to creep up, you forget you had a dock, right? And I think of things that we've reduced over time. Librarians at every middle school, right? Every school complex. When I think about our programming, we used to have world language in the elementary school. These are all things that, over time, you have to make decisions. And it's like being on a mountain and you start feeling your extremities go. Every kid has to take high school English, right? 4 years of it required. So at the end of the day, if we have to make really hard decisions, and we're talking about a large number of people, the first thing to go is the things that aren't compliance driven. Your electives, your clubs and activities, your athletics, all of these things. So when I look at this list, you see APs, you see all of the things that are listed is trying to preserve what we have. We have really worked hard over decades to try every year to find creative ways to keep as many of these positions alive. The counselors were added through the counseling review. Over years, we made decisions at the cost of other things to keep some of these. And I just think we're at the precipice of, if we can't find a way to fund these things go away. And I want to just emphasize we're fortunate to have an excellent music, theater, arts, athletics program, our unified sports that we offer. The mock trial, DECA, you're going to see some emails from me soon about the success they're having. And I just think we offer a lot, and I don't want to see us lose it. And selfishly as a parent, I don't want my kids to not experience what I've been a part of teaching everybody else's kids. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So on the right-hand side, I just want to point out, if we have the space, it's almost like when Randy Moss told Tom Brady, just let me run it, let me air it out and let me run after the ball. I feel a little bit like if you give me the ball and you give us the ball, we can get some return on investments on a few areas. And I gave one example, which happened to be in-district programming and if it's stable and whatnot. So I don't want to scare Mrs. Morano. We haven't even talked about what that would look like. But a stable program is an opportunity if you have the right people in place and there's room and it's set up correctly. That's just one. When I look at this list, I just want to be clear on a few of these things. Early college, right? Looking at enrollment, dual enrollment, partnering. I had a great conversation, a dinner meeting with the president dean to just talk about particular opportunities out there where he's looking to expand and grow and where we could, based on our electives. But you remember my mountain analogy? This is where we run into trouble, because when we try to set up pathways and programs, if we don't have the people to do it, it falls apart. So the second one, the innovative career pathways. I met with Karen McGuire, Tri-County Superintendent. We had an at-length conversation about what they offer and how they offer. There's opportunities in Franklin to offer the same thing if we aligned coursework. When you enter 9 through 12, for example, and you have the right series of courses that are tied to a specific area, you can create pathways and make yourself eligible for what is Career Technical Education Chapter 74 funding. But it takes us investing in ourselves before we can invest in anything else. We've had great conversations with the Franklin Fire Department. We were already partners with our senior project with the Franklin Police Department, and we met at the fire department. I was appreciative of the chief who invited Dean College, invited Franklin Public Schools to sit and talk about, hey, they have a need. They're looking for really strong people who are graduating and interested in working in the fire service. And we've talked a little bit about how can we make that happen at Franklin High. And I see so much potential in legal protective services as a pathway. We have a forensics lab already in the high school. When I think about EMT certification, trying to get kids to walk out of that school, if you have the EMT, you're basically starting the process out of high school with a graduating diploma to get your paramedic and make yourself eligible to become a firefighter. Where we know we want to hire good people, particularly vetted people who come from Franklin, invested in this town. These are opportunities that I think I would just put out. We can't get there when we spend May and June cutting, laying off, not planning the way we want to. And then when I was given the keys to the office, we had 117 vacancies. We spent the summer hiring 117 people that either left or they were reduced and then came back. And I just point that out as if anyone's been a part of a hiring committee or been a part of what it takes to screen, schedule, recommend, we have a very, and to do that in the summer is not ideal when you think of a hiring cycle. You try to do that when everyone's trying to hire so that you can widen your range. We've hired some great people in the summer, but I more mean you're trying to catch a time. So I just point that these are all impacts of having some instability in our ability to function at the level that we need to. If you could move forward. Thank you. This is, I'm not going to reiterate this, but basically everything that's what we value and what we need to preserve is also on the table. And I need to be clear, if we don't have the funding we need, we will be in a situation where we're going to have to make some serious reductions. So I don't say that out of fear. I'm not into performance either. If you've known me at all, I don't say things to get a rise or to get people worried. We'll always work as hard as we can, but I think there's a reality to the situation that I need to be really clear about so that we can have, work towards a solution as Chairman Mercer mentioned. And then these are the 4 doors I think that were mentioned earlier, just to kind of talk through. The reason Thrive requires continued modeling is because I wasn't comfortable to model out every single thing. If we put everything we've ever lost, I don't think that would be realistic over a 20-year period. But we put together what I feel is a stable, partially restored budget that allows us to get some footing and start to help us make the right decisions for the community. I think there may be just 2 more. Okay, so I mentioned these already, but these are some impacts of reducing. You see the fees, cuts to programs and reductions of staff are logical consequences of not having enough money to fund the budget. You can keep moving. And elimination of activities, and then recruitment and the culture of volatility. I'll just sit there for a minute and just talk through the atmosphere when you have turnover after turnover. And last year, having to lay off, and then we received more money to help us try to rehire, but people had already left. There are some people who get, beat vulnerability to the punch. I don't want to wait to be told in the 11th hour there's an opportunity. So we've seen it's been much harder to retain staff and recruit staff. And we don't want to create a reputation here where it's volatile and unstable every year. We work really hard. I work really hard to try to build as many relationships with people and try to work with our staff on that and try to be as approachable as possible and respectful as possible. But at the end of the day, I think people have to look out for what is the best interest of their family, and they don't want to be in a situation where if they're brand new to the district that they have to worry about whether they'll continue to be here. So that's really the last piece. I think there's 2 more slides. You've seen this in other ways. This is the net school spending, highest to lowest. You'll see where Franklin is currently. And then the next slide, Jamie, is based on the aggregate wealth and the local effort puts us there. So I think they're juxtaposed to one another, and it's an important part of the conversation as we talk through solutions. And that's my final slide, and then I think we're kicking it back to you.
Thanks, Lucas. So preliminary solutions and some override information. This is mostly has been rehashed before. These are slides that have gone out last year and years past, but I just go through them and they'll be up again when we post the meeting. So essentially, just people ask me this all the time, Mr. Chairman. So what do we do? How do you get the schools more money? Choice 1 is an override. On the list up here, or you could raise other recurring non-tax levy revenue sources. The superintendent just said raise fees, or something of that sort. I don't really know how much more creative we can be after that, but those are really your options there. The second choice is shift resources from municipal departments to the school education department, and I think we heard the superintendent on that earlier. We've brought this up every year, and obviously I think most of the community feels uncomfortable doing that. Paradigm changes, just some examples up there about visioning, facilities. I think the superintendent just addressed that as well. He doesn't have police shift schedules, but there are other ways, and I think the special education slide was a really good one about trying to tell that story about where there are shifts in policy decisions or paradigm shifts. And I think we saw there an opportunity where the cost drivers are still high, but obviously if the schools if the schools did not do what they're doing on that slide, the budget deficit would be higher. So that's a really good thing. And I just have to make the plug, as I always do, for bond ratings as well as true rainy days. This feels rainy, but it will be worse at some point down in the future. We try to preserve, if not grow, all reserves at all costs. Just for the public to know kind of where do we go all this from here. Tonight there's the public discussion on the state of the town budget. Just for people to recognize that a lot of the numbers in here, like healthcare, aren't finalized yet. Property and casualty, usually the month of March and early April, there's a lot of things both the school and town does to try to refine those numbers to exact numbers. And so we're going to work over the next few weeks on that. I try to set a balanced budget out based on some assumptions that are a little more fine-toothed than what's here tonight. It takes my team, it's myself, the finance director, the treasurer collector, the deputy comptroller, the HR director, and the deputy town administrator. Last year it was Julie Jacobson before we had Amy. This will be Amy's first year going through this, but it's really the 6 of us that write everything. We produce all the budget exhibits, all the historical data sets. We write the 100-and-something page budget narrative, strategic initiatives, the department heads chip in. It takes a solid month for my staff to go from like a final budget into production mode to get all of that ready to release the budget on April 12th. So we continually go through, even though most numbers are pretty well set for most departments, like the Board of Health or Planning and some of the smaller ones. I know Bob Dutch, as well as Lucas and Tina and Paula and all of them, we continue to refine those. Health insurance, just for an example, we just received word last week that we're looking at a 7.6% interest increase, not the 9.5 that Bob had mentioned. That's something we will fine tune as an example of what both teams will do over the next 2, 3, 4 weeks. As the chair mentioned earlier, I'll release the budget on April 12th. There's no requirement, by the way. I want to get it right, but that's usually about the date right around school vacation where I release the budget on that week. And then finance committee hearings are May 6th for general government, Public safety and DPW is on May 8th, and the public schools and education are on May 15th. The town council hearings are on May 23rd and May 24th. And I just added on here, any override discussion essentially must take place, whatever the choice is, we'll go through in a second, with this group or the school committee, the town council, or the clerk, all somehow within all this. And so this override 101 slide I put up twice in the last, this is the third time in the last 15 months or so. Step one is essentially the school committee begins the process of an override. I think I mentioned earlier, the hearing is on March 19th for the school budget, and then April 2nd, I think, is the final budget, final vote, right, Lucas? So probably around then, I think, you know, the school committee has to ask for something based on those final numbers that they work on over the next several weeks. It doesn't have to be a big dissertation, just a letter. It works. You can just say one sentence for all I care. But something, two sentences. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. You're right, exactly. So you need to do some of that. And then the council essentially reviews the school request. And then a discussion, I think, has to occur with the municipal departments to see if there's any requests from them. And then optional is whether or not to vet it through this group here. It's not required, but it's optional. I think that the town has set up the joint budget subcommittee with all these committees to kind of work out these issues. And then step 4 is the town council, if an override and people want one and there's support for one. It's really about working with the town clerk, who had an awesome election cycle this year already. Congratulations, Nancy. She
My favorite thing to do.
and you're amazing at it.
Hey, if I wasn't so tired.
Nobody would even notice if you had an election yesterday and you were up till 11 o'clock. You're back here late at night again, as a committed public official you are. And election schedules vary. I think that's where her office needs to be in discussion with all of us about what those requirements are. Just for example, if you do your own ballot initiative, it's 35 days. The council has to vote before you put a ballot question out and set an election. This is one of those years also where there's early and mail-in, so there's going to have to be some coordination. If there is a separate election, is there mail-in option? Is there not? I mean, there are actually a significant amount of details to go through. This is not simple. And then the federal election is a 90-day window. Okay, so you know, it is. I know there's been talk about whether or not that would cost extra money. We did confirm with Bill Galvin's office that you can hold a ballot question on a presidential election without all the other tabulators and stuff like that. But you guys can ask Nancy that. I'm just giving you the kind of high level. And as I've mentioned before, you know, paid staff, and we'll answer the town attorneys here if we need to answer any questions. You know, we actually can't advocate for anything. We have a little more leeway, Lucas and myself, to discuss with you in a public forum the four corners of what an override would look like. We can have a little bit of input into that. But after that, all paid staff really are very limited in their ability to advocate. If people want to look up what not to do, I'm not throwing them under the bus, but just Google Town of Brookline, and you will find that they did send home notices in backpacks, which is like literally the one thing that they tell you literally on day one not to do. They sent home notices in backpacks with all the kids, vote yes on one or whatever. And so people can Google that. That's not what to do. And I understand, and we understand, the town attorney is ready to answer any questions. You know, I understand that this is new for a lot of people. Many people may have questions. That's fine. And I would mention on the slide that I never really updated a grassroots organization is required in some sort of legal structure. Huge kudos to Ruth Ann O'Sullivan and everybody behind of us for their incredible effort. My predecessor and I have been asking for this for a long time, and I can't give Ruth Ann enough shout out for her incredible amount of time that she has spent on this. This is very, very hard work. Amy and I used to do this in a different life, and I can tell you it's thankless work, it's hard work, it's sweaty work, it's 7 days a week. And this community should thank, at a minimum, Ruth Ann for her incredible efforts to get a crowd together like this, so I have to give her a quick plug. just so the public at home doesn't think everyone was clapping for this slide, they were not. That was just me. That was an extra round of applause for Ruth Ann. This is not the slide everyone's going to clap on. But I have to do my job, Mr. Chairman. This is the last slide in my presentation. As the community goes forward and discusses, obviously, an override or some sort of increase, I had to put up there, it's in the memo as well, there are a lot of other cost increases to other things in town that have been happening. At the end of the day, this is about money in people's wallets and pocketbooks and what the community is going to be comfortable with to meet the needs that the superintendent just discussed, right? So, the average tax bill off last year is this is based on a $650,000 house. You're looking at about a $200 tax increase just on Prop 2.5 alone already. There's a new stormwater fee that has went into effect. This is the first fiscal year, but to maintain our permit with the EPA, this is an unfunded mandate by the federal government. This is not a choice. This is not us being cute at the local level. We don't want to do this if we didn't have to. This is an unfunded mandate with the federal government, and yes, the town of Franklin did sue the EPA 10 years ago. We lost, mostly. Tough beating, Goliath up there in the feds, but we did do it a little bit. This year, there's going to be another $10 to $20 per household to maintain our permit. There's a sewer rate increase for the Beaver Street Interceptor that went into effect already this fiscal year. There'll be another 15% and another 10% in July 24, July 25. We are expecting trash and recycling fee to go up about $25 to $50 in FY25. This is still lower than it was 20 years ago. The DPW's done an amazing job on this, but it's still going to be an increase next year. And then our waste management contract is up at the end of next year, which will also result in a trash fee, likely modestly going up in 26. PFAS remediation, I will not go on my soliloquy about how much I hate this thing, but PFAS remediation is another unfunded state mandate by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that's going to look for a water filtration system and a little PFAS remediation system of about an 8% water rate hike each of the next 3 years. The expected debt exclusion for Tri-County is going to hit this year, and it'll hit in 27. And then one thing that a lot of people talked to me about a lot was they got used to the 10-cent electricity rate with municipal aggregation. A huge win. People saved more money than they actually think they did when National Grid's rate was 33 cents. This is a positive. We were very lucky and worked really hard to try to maintain that at 15 cents for the next 2 years. But in 2025 in November, that party will be over too. I don't know what the prospect will look like. That's still a long way away. But I know that there has been a lot of folks in town that were concerned about even that 5-cent increase and the impact it would have on the affordability for a lot of families to pay their bills. So there's a lot of stuff here. All of this adds up. All of it is small amounts of dollars, but when you take into consideration all of it, it does add up a little bit for a lot of families. So, Mr. Chairman, I know that's not the way we want to end, but I have to do my job and make sure people understand the broader ecosystem and the broader context in which we're working in. Go for it.
Thank you, Jamie,
Thanks.
Lucas, and
Yeah.
your team. Great job. I think this has been really helpful to not only this, the Joint Budget Subcommittee, but to a lot of people that are here tonight. And thank you all for being here, and the people on the webinar and on Zoom and watching on TV. This is where it starts. This is where this whole process starts, and you need to be a part of it. This affects each and every one of you. And in many ways, not always just one way, it affects you every which way. I'm going to start with a couple of questions that I always start with every year. I ask the same questions only because I think it's important for the community to understand, number one, how it works and why it's done the way it is. So, Lucas or Bob, I'm not sure which one of you want to hit this one, but what's the projected surplus of the revolving funds at the end of June 30, 2024? And why do we have that surplus?
I'll start by saying the surplus at the end of this year will be less than the surplus was at the end of last year. What we've budgeted for, well, we're talking revolving accounts.
Correct.
I have the figures, actually, possibly in this pile. So the surplus at the end of FY '23 was $9,117,000. Right now, the surplus is projected at the end of FY '24 at $4,753,000. So there's a $5 million difference, and that's what we've put into revolving into the budget this year, and that's why you're seeing that increase, as well as some less revenue.
Okay, and that was the second part of my question. The revolving account number, which was 9, it is now 5 or 45. The difference between that, those revolving numbers tend to be very similar annually, and then
Correct.
take X amount of it, use it to help fund some of the deficit,
Correct.
correct?
Correct.
Okay. The other easy question, to a degree. User fee, I know you talked about the user fees. Again, I'm very familiar with them,
Yes.
having been involved in putting them
Wrote the
in.
policy.
Putting them in back in the 90s. Are you looking at increases in the user fees?
So we're currently examining the fees to look at how we compare across other towns.
Right.
We're also looking at what that would look like. I will say, the recommendation we made was based on keeping the fees where they are. Because we have two kind of things at play here. One is trying to, I gotta be careful here, but I wanna see us reinvest in this community, and through an override, right? It wouldn't be probably good optically or politically to jack up fees and ask for an override. So I think they're both at play, but what I can tell you is if we were not funded at level service and it was below, we were already looking at fees, and we would see an increase regardless of what other communities are doing. We would have to, just to support any type of fee-based program. So they are being analyzed, they are being looked at, but it's kind of like a two-pather, if you will, on how we would have to address those situations.
Okay, another one that you did address, but I think it's important for everybody to understand, is the federal ESSER funds that we've benefited from
Right.
the last few years. Those are done and gone.
They're gone for every community in the state, and I think what I would say about that is I think the ESSER funds, in some degree, have prolonged the spike. So what has happened is the money came in during COVID because we had a pandemic. We received those funds, and we were able to sustain certain pieces of the budget because of them. With those coming off, you have to make decisions on whether you absorb the positions that you had or not restore those positions. So in this budget model, it's keeping the interventionists, it's keeping the school counselors in that budget model. And with those going away, if we didn't have a level service budget, those would be on the table for, we wouldn't be able to afford all those things.
Okay, so, again, just to be clear, the ESSER funds at the end of June 30th,
They are gone.
2024
They were spent.
are gone. There are no ESSER funds that you've put into your 25 budget.
No ESSER funds are allowed to be, and we did not,
Okay.
just for legal disclaimer.
And I know you addressed some of the programs
Yeah.
that you're looking to reinstate, and I know that's a question that I've been asked by some residents as to, well, what are they putting back, stuff that they have, programs that they had 10 years ago or 15 years ago. The programs that you're looking to reinstate, are programs that have been cut in the last year, in the last 2 years?
The programs we're looking to reinstate were cut in recent years. I'd say last year was middle school clubs and activities, for example. We realized when we started to do the math and calculate out the costs, to thrive and go beyond $9.3 million and look at 20 years of programming, I think I mentioned this briefly in the presentation,
Yeah.
the number would climb, if we reinstated all the things we lost, would go into a larger, beyond 9, it could have been 20 million. And then I felt as though coming to this table as a community and putting out a number that's trying to restore everything over time, I didn't see as reasonable to get a conversation going. Because in my mind, we need to have the largest number that can be affordable and passable among a community, in my mind. Now, I will say, I could have added a few other pieces. My goal is, by stabilizing this budget and getting better footing, and then re-examining our positions like we do every year, we will have opportunity to look at, can we look at the list of things that we have cut over those 20 years? Can we find ways? Because we have to look at this sustainably as well, which brings up just the idea of we're trying to do our diligence, but the number I gave you is an honest number of what we would need to get our class sizes, which is key, number one, in order. Keep every counselor we have on staff right now, keep every nurse, keep every single position that's supporting kids in some way, and start to reassess and rebuild without losing the ground that we've lost. Because when you cut it, it costs even more to bring it back. And I think that would be a message I'd want to share in that response, Chairman Mercer.
You gave me the answer I was looking for.
Okay.
Recent years. That was the answer I was looking
Okay.
for.
Feel like Jeopardy. Oh, no, you didn't get it. Yeah. It's no.
Thank you. Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you. First of all, Jamie, Lucas, thank you both and your team so much for all the hard work you've been putting together, not just on this presentation, but just throughout the budget preparing process. I recognize, and we all recognize, just how much goes into it, and we're really appreciative. This was a fantastic presentation, not fantastic information by any means, but fantastic presentation of the information before us. And one theme that you both touched on, which I think was excellent for us to see, was really the cost drivers in the town part and the school part of government. And these aren't factors that we're just making up. These are very real cost drivers. And would you mind going to slide 14, please, in regards to specifically the school cost drivers? And I know we discussed this last night, but I think it's worth repeating. One thing there, the third item there, the increase in district special education costs and service. So, Lucas, that's that 2.2 million. So in a typical year over year, I know we mentioned this. Our budget increase. It was what 2.7% increase typically, and for our total school budget, correct?
Correct.
Correct. And
Average.
And that number right there, that $2.2 million increase, that's greater than our typical year-over-year increase for the entire school budget, correct?
Correct.
So that one factor right there, which again is completely out of our control, correct?
That's the cost to educate students. That's the increase to educate students outside of our schools.
And that's that one thing that's completely out of our control is already driving us over what our typical year-over-year increase is. And that's just one thing. And then everything, and there's just a little context around this, and everything else on top of that. And these are all things that we need to provide and aren't. I mean, we see transportation costs, other special ed costs, health insurance costs, also things that are out of our control. And it's not just on the school part of government, but also on the town part of government. You mentioned, Jamie, that you're seeing similar things.
Yep.
So I think that number right there, just that one thing in context is important for us to see just how much these increases are impacting us. And also, Lucas, to your point when mentioning, ways that we've gotten creative, and I think the decrease in grants and revolving funds, that's something that, your team has been making just an excellent effort to try to, find alternative ways for paying. The fact that the revolving funds, we increased those greater in the past year than typical, but that's simply not sustainable going forward. But it was, again, an attempt to try to see what we could do with what we had.
Right. And I think I would round off, the way you referenced it last night was, this is not about like special education being, I want it framed correctly, because I do, the way you're talking about a figure, and how one figure on that list can increase. So it's not about special ed, just for the people. And does everyone get that? Just wanted to-
Exactly, yeah.
The second piece I'd mentioned, and we've talked about this, I know Jamie and I have discussed, grants that we're eligible for have decreased over time.
Yeah.
We're not seeing, because sometimes we do get a good grant question from someone, like, is there a grant available, or I see this? And I had Dr. Rogers apply for a grant, which she said, I don't know if we're eligible. I said, do it anyway. And she did it, and we weren't eligible because we didn't fit the criteria. They were prioritizing low-income communities, with they're trying to provide more support. Understandable, but it did say it was open to anybody, so we tried, and it had to do with like school security. So we find that as the money has become more finite, they're trying to prioritize specific areas to help support. We just don't fit that category. And I don't know if they look at held harmless when they evaluate grants, but they figure you already received your grant in that funding formula. So that's how that comes to be.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's an excellent point. And also to your point about special ed, about this not being purely special ed issue, would you mind going to slide 20 again? And this was wonderful, absolutely wonderful information presented to us. And Paula, thank you so much, because you're absolutely right. Like, we do have a moral obligation to give every student the best possible education here in Franklin that we can. So thank you for all the work that you're doing, and thank you for this information. And not only is it a moral obligation, we can see right here that it's a smart return, it's a smart investment and good return investment, because that 2.2 million number would be even larger. We can see that right there.
That's what Jamie said.
Right.
It would be even larger if we weren't investing in those positions.
Correct.
And you mentioned the positions that we're trying to increase and bring back with enrollment reduction. So every position, and again, just this small context of special ed, positions that we aren't allowed to either restore or increase, those have real fiscal impacts on us from right here, because that number could be going down, that total savings.
Correct.
So yeah, thank you. I mean, yeah, thank you for showing this, because I think, again, there's a human factor to these positions, but there's also a very real cost savings that we are doing our best to try to realize those cost savings to the best of our ability. And when we invest in these positions, we see a very real dollar amount. And then the last thing, two things that you mentioned, but I think they're really worth highlighting. We had, I believe it was at the end of January, a workshop with school committee members and your team, Lucas, and a number of different
Principals.
Yeah, the principals, exactly. And two themes that kept coming up over and over again were classroom sizes and this cultural volatility that you alluded to. And I wanted to highlight that because you mentioned them both, but they're not quantifiable, but they're very real in terms of how much they can erode the quality of a school district. So would you mind just, again, expanding on those in terms of just how detrimental it can be to have those classroom sizes not be within our parameters? Again, this cultural volatility that you had alluded to.
I think I would just reiterate that we develop our budgets, we get the money that's approved for us to fund, and then we have to make decisions on the team we're going to field. And the impact we've had in my time, and I've been around a while, and I can remember a time I was an interim assistant principal, and in 2006 or 8, I don't remember, and I remember seeing my name on a board as being potentially cut. And I was in the room. And I remember thinking like, oof, and I think I was second to the bottom, and it could have changed my whole trajectory. had I left. And I think that's my story of potential, realized potential of, if I was cut that day, I'm heading off to a different community and who knows how that goes. But at the end of the day, I'm so glad it didn't happen and I'm here. And despite the challenges, I will say the volatility comes in when we try to plan. And I think if we had the space, and Jamie and I have talked about our bandwidth to do the things, and we're asked to do a lot, and we try to really focus and get as much done as possible in the amount of hours there are in a day. But the amount of hiring, screening, laying off, all those things take a lot of time at a key time in the school year where you need to close out the books on one year and open the books on another, and it does create that. I think my worry for our newest folks that we've hired is trying not to create a pattern, and we have a chance at this juncture, this crossroad, to really try to restabilize. And I see such a return on investment on this. It was mentioned last night, but there are communities that have put together and reinvested in their system, have put together daycares and offering that and tuitioning it. You know, when you think about daycare, when you don't have to pay the school vacation in the summer and whenever you go away, but having that opportunity, if you reinvest and you open it up to your staff, your school and town employees, as a recruitment and retention tool. When we think about, and then if there's open spaces for families, like these are things that produce revenue, provide a service, create another, when I'm at the table and trying to get someone to come on board and sell Franklin Public Schools, I just think, you know, we use every trick in the book and tool in the book to do it. But, you know, we've had 3 resignations mid-year for folks that have either had to move because of they thought they could do it, but the commute's too much and the child care issue is there. We've had people who say, you know what, healthcare, I can't sustain this. I can go somewhere else, and I worry for us that if we keep going down a path like that, it's just going to continue. And on the flip side, if I put my taxpayer hat and my house hat on, you know, I think the education in schools are the heartbeat of a town, and I think it takes all departments for it to run. And I've said this before, I'll say it again, and for the same reasons we repeat things, I can't say enough about the types of services we have in this department. We heard a little bit about our town clerk. We've heard police, fire, DPW. When I think about the veterans, there's just all the things that we do across the library, all the things that my family has been fortunate to have. I think these are all part of a system, and schools are part of that ecosystem. And I think we bring each other up, and I think we all benefit from I think it brings value to your home when you have a solid school system. I think anyone who doesn't believe that, I would disagree wholeheartedly. And I think we're all in this for the right reasons. And that was a long answer, but I had to hit on a few points that I had to hit today. So thank you.
I appreciate that. And again, thank you, Lucas. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you to your teams. Yeah, it's some very sobering facts and figures here. And yeah, it's excellent information for all of us on this committee, but the entire community to have, so thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Any other, George?
It's my job to be a skeptic. That's what the Finance Committee should do, and I think we do a fair job at it. But I will admit that my skepticism has been lowered dramatically tonight. And the reason is because I finally didn't get the Reader's Digest version, as she mentioned, because that's what I ask for all the time for most people. Hey, just give me the Reader's Digest version. And there's probably people in the room who don't know what the Reader's Digest is. So.
I'm with you, George.
Everyone laughed, though.
Yeah, they did. But tonight I got the whole version, which we haven't, as a committee, at the Finance Committee meetings on whatever it is, 15th, I think, of May, we've never gotten the full blown, and that's a problem in my mind. The second thing I want to mention is, see the gray hair?
For me, or?
Well, yeah, but yours, mine's from age, well, not really, but that's another story. The people like this are the ones that are going to make this override question sink or swim. And how, maybe it's one Franklin, maybe it's a visit continually to the senior center. I don't know what it is, but the presentation we saw tonight has to be given to those voters. And we vote. We, the old people, vote, always. It's always the thing. Nancy
Absolutely.
may know that.
For sure. I love
yeah.
seeing you all.
It's the,
Because they vote for you, too. As they should.
my point is, if you don't get that segment of the community, and it's gonna be tough, I mean, every one of us is on a fixed income, truly fixed. We got a bonus last year, Social Security went up 8-something%, but it was 1% this year. So that's the, you know, we have to be, that's the target audience, I would guess. I'm not 100% convinced yet, but that's what the process is.
I appreciate your comments, and from one gray-haired person to a white-haired person to another, I can appreciate that. And I think we do need to continue to get the word out and
This
educate.
came when I was 22 years old.
Me
so
too.
I'm,
Me too.
I'm an expert at it.
Me too. Now it's thinning, but we won't go there. So I agree with your sentiment, and I think this is really, as Mr. Chairman Mercer mentioned, it's trying to come up with a solution for the community, and I agree with your comments.
The other question I have, which is, I guess, been a sore point for you guys, is that the studies we did about buildings. We have 2 buildings that's sitting out there that cost a lot of money every year to run. Parmenter and Kennedy. That has to be decided pretty soon because it affects everything. It affects everything. You know, I'll mention that. That's a question I'll ask in May again.
And I think I would just answer that by saying we're in the process right now of doing the master facilities plan. Jamie had it up on one of his slides. And I think we're looking at, we learned last year, trying to solve one part of the puzzle wasn't giving us the full information about the full district. And I think when we went into redistricting, it was really focused on one area. But what we need to do is look at the big picture and look at all schools and all environments and try to make the best decision. That's why we have a master planner who's working with us currently. And, those are decisions I can't answer for you now, but I can tell you
understand that.
But they're doing the work to look at
How about May 15th? Yeah?
Well, I can tell you, we will certainly be further down the road on those discussions, because the goal is to do this assessment and analysis, look at what's been done, fill the holes on what needs to happen, and then make some real informed decisions as a committee. So I would just say that to you, that's one of our goals, is to look at how we're organized. And I think that's a part of this puzzle as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, George. And when you get this seat, this is what happens. Okay. Natalie.
I have a couple of them. One is just looking ahead. Assume everything works out this year. What is next year looking like? Is that another big cliff, or is that more, as of right now, is that looking like the more to whatever in a % that you normally have?
I think what I would say is
FY26, right?
FY26, yeah.
FY26. If we were able to get the stabilized budget, and that was factored into the budget model as we move forward, one of the goals we have, we're meeting on Friday, is to model out what this looks like in practice from year one for the next 5 years, and look at the sustainability of it. I think a lot of factors come in as we think ahead. We think about planning. We think about our all of those costs that we have that are either fixed, compliance-driven, or where we have choice, are all things that have to be factored into that model as we move forward. So it's a very good question, and I think that's an answer that the community needs to know as we move forward. So I appreciate you asking.
Jamie, you want to follow?
Yeah, just Natalie and just anyone else, that didn't make it to page 7 of my memo.
That's
hey,
most
I
people. That's most everyone here.
Hey,
Page 7 on the
it's
4.
called CYA. I gotta cover my rear,
Sorry,
because somebody's
sorry.
gonna say, you never told us, and I'm gonna go, actually I did, but that.
I read it, Jamie.
Thanks, Brian, you read it by like 1 o'clock on Friday. When I look down the road, I just really quickly, the paragraph in there, I had to write it, right? And FY26 is a whole new round of contracts for all of the unions in town. There's a couple of the school-related ones, I think, that are off-cycle. Cafeteria, ESPs, I think, are not part of that. but what I always call the big three, the big five: police, fire, teachers, custodians, DPW, librarians, trades, maintenance, sergeants, patrol. I mean, those are the ones, and I think anything we discuss, people in the audience back here have to realize you could save the day right now, and we could all literally be right back in this situation next to the cliff in FY26, or we could be over the cliff in FY26. In addition to that, you know, we are, Remington, I think everybody knows Remington Jefferson's at 30 years of age. It needs the big remodel. It's going to be a $7 million borrowing, roughly, maybe more. And the Horace Mann School needs a new roof. This is what's not labeled in here, the capital pieces. I know in the finance committee we go through them, and the council, you know, Councilor Plegler leads the capital committee. But when I look down the road, if all seven school, or the big seven school buildings need capital improvements too, you're just adding more debt and interest, and it's cutting into the pie that we talked about earlier, right? So it's, you know, at some point either the pie has to grow, like the superintendent was saying, or you have to make judicious decisions within that pie. Just collective bargaining alone, but also the debt and interest in the school facilities in particular, need to be evaluated, because those are huge cost drivers that could, even on a small override, say $2 million, right? Even $2 million override, that could get wiped away right away, just by those additional costs for personnel. And I know I make a plea in here, and I know it's not always popular to everybody. I respect that. I know we all have different bargaining units. We all have different representatives that bargain. Other districts and towns do common, COLA equity. But when you have the same, COLA, you can manage and you can build out those models better. I know no one wants to hear that, but as a town manager, as I look at the entire town budget, you will see a 4, 4, and 4, then go, 4, 4, and 4, and then all of a sudden we want 3, 3, and then you start escalating to a point. No override can cover those costs. It just can't. With what Lucas said earlier, I think we both said, which is without making a ding into those other cuts. The DPW, most of those new items that the community asks for every week probably won't make it in the budget, and you probably won't see additional support services on trails and tree and all that other stuff in FY26 unless we can really work together on those issues. So, to answer your question about looking down the road, I see a cliff, almost the next 2 fiscal years at a minimum until collective bargaining is solved.
And then my other question was, just from a practicality standpoint, and I don't know how much you can answer this, but, so say it goes override and people are like, yes, because actually your presentation was really good, and love to just be like, yes, great, everyone, but obviously it's more challenging than that. So say the gap is 10 million. 2.5% got us 3.3. So does that mean your override is an additional 7.5% to get to your, so that's, just because from a practical standpoint, I think that's what people want to know, right? It's not like, so you're asking for an additional, so you're asking for 10% in a year, for the 2% normal and then the 7.5 additional. That's what we're essentially asking for to get this budget.
You'll know that certainly on April 12th. We'll know that earlier than that, Natalie, but you're not far off. I mean, when you're looking for a 13% increase,
6.2.
and say you get 3 to 5% in that range, you're still looking at a 7.5 to 10% increase on an override. And also, this is not what I want to say. Like, I would love to do all sorts of goals and ideas and all sorts of projects in town. I'm a community development person. This is my jam. But eventually, we have to rein in the spending somewhere to make sure that we don't continually every year fall into this trap. At some point, we have to make some decisions. And I thought Lucas spoke to it well. He could have gone back on that slide, wherever, and I don't want to joke around, but beyond the thrive, the 16, 17%, at some point we have to say as a community, what happened 20 years ago is in the past. We have to pick up today. What do we need for students today in the next 10 years? And we have to identify that stuff. And some of those issues we have to let go of. We just literally can't afford it all. Otherwise, we're putting our community also into a risk where we're one of those communities now that is literally unaffordable for most people. So the affordability nature of living in Franklin, the housing values going up, the property taxes going, all that stuff, become really hard. So we need to have both of those conversations, I think, in the next couple of years at the same time.
And I would just remind, there's opportunities to not only reinvest and look for opportunities to have more revenue streams, right? Also get bona fide state support through some of the programming, but you have to build the house before you can get that. You have to have a commitment to fielding the right team right off the bat. So I just think those are all at play. And I think we have to, this is like a large puzzle. Trying to develop these 4 models is a lot to try to do one budget model, but try to get that out. And I would say there are pieces that aren't listed in that number that I would bring back. But I think if we do this correctly, we create some sustainability for the future by making some decisions that we need to make around our budget, around how we can save money and earn money. I think that we can still bring back some of those pieces in a variety of ways. So I don't want to overcommit or overspeak to that. Those aren't off the table. I have a list here of everything that's been cut. It's posted. It'll be on our website over the last 20 years. There are pieces in here that I wouldn't necessarily recommend bringing back. However, there's a lot on here. The ones that are highlighted are enrollment-based reductions. So everything you see there will have is basically because of enrollment going down, we've kept up with those pieces. What's increased in those 20 years has been your support services, right? Your counseling support, mental health support, healthcare support, and then all the other costs that go that we've already referenced in the budget. So I would say there are pieces in here and programs that I think there's an interest. We put a survey out to staff when I put out the budget update that you had in the packet. We sent something to staff. I put a link to a survey form. I've received some great feedback from folks around, things that they'd love to see back in our district. So I think these aren't closed conversations, but for the purposes of tonight, stabilizing and partially restoring was the pathway in my recommendation, because I want this to be successful.
Thank you. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Paul?
Thank you, Chairman. So one of the things that I think is really interesting here and that both of you have hit on is the long-term impact of not being able to invest and having to make up for lost ground. So Jamie, in the beginning you had mentioned that we do have to continue paying unemployment costs every time we have layoffs. So that's something that I think really needs to be focused on here as we're talking about potential reductions. Not only is that staff that is missing, but that's also a rather significant cost to us that we have to continue to pay even after folks are gone. And what is the duration of that, Jamie?
Well, it depends. I mean, I think in certain instances, we'll probably see a spike, just, after June 15th, which I think is the contractual obligation of the schools. Some people get jobs right away. I mean, it's a very, very competitive, marketplace right now. Some folks get jobs right away and you're only paying out for 2 months. Some folks, and I hate to say this, but I don't think I'm telling any tales out of school. Look at what went on in the city of Newton. Look what's going on in Andover. Look what's going on in Dedham. Look what's going on in Haverhill. I mean, you see now the impacts, particularly in the town of Andover. They did lay off 30 or 40 teachers because of the contractual obligations. Newton actually tried to pass an override before the strike. It failed at $10 million in Newton. And then they came back to the situation that we all are familiar with that was on TV. And the mayor announced, I think, between 50 and 70 public sector jobs, not all teachers, not all fire, not all police, but shared around, are going to get laid off. Some of those individuals may not get a job right away. So it just depends, on the circumstances of those individuals. Some, we may pay unemployment for 1 month. I think in the case of the schools, and Lucas may be able to speak to the culture a little bit better, I think you have a situation where, if there is a redundancy in June, that person's probably going to get scooped up, probably somewhat quick before September or kind of the October 1st, which is kind of a cultural deadline of like, that's your roster, that's who you're fielding on your team for the remainder of the year. So usually we pay out unemployment for about 3 to 4 months, but some people, it adds up. And so there is a detrimental cost for sure to reductions and redundancies.
So from the sounds of it, if we're not able to pass an override and we do have to make significant cuts, this is going to be something that will most likely then still bite into the budget significantly.
Yes.
It's not that we've suddenly saved a lot. We've saved a significantly lesser portion compared to the amount of benefits that we've lost.
That's right. And it's kind of like the additional paramedics, put in there that with the roster that we have, we can save on overtime. That's more of a positive spin because the revenue's coming in and there's a cost reduction. But in your example, it's the total inverse, right? Because you may lay somebody off just $100,000 a year total budget impact. It's actually not a reduction of 100,000. It's probably 90,000, right? It's still significant when you're in a budget crisis, but there is another side to that tail. And I think why I said earlier, we don't have an option in Franklin. Other towns may have this, because the schools live on one side of the town and the town lives on the other side. But in Franklin, there is no option other than us working extremely collaboratively. And your example is a really, really good point of that, right? What workers' comp trends are for the schools impact the entire budget. There's another cost on there of an 11% increase. It's not anyone's fault. It's just the cost of doing business. So there is this really, really big need in Franklin to make sure that we are working exceptionally close together to know what we're doing on the town side is going to affect the schools. Just like snow, mowing the lawns, it's probably not the first thing on their mind, right? Because it's in the DPW budget. But that's still a cost driver for us. We have to do it. It's a huge priority, obviously, for the athletic fields, for the games and everything. But that's why we need to understand one another's budget really, really well, because what they do affects us and what we do affects them.
And that makes a lot of sense, and I do appreciate that sense of, it is really a community effort here. I think it's very important for everyone to note that, and I appreciate that you two are really conveying that well. In looking at the hold harmless side of things, that, I think people don't fully recognize the fact that that's a very significant amount of money that we are essentially given that I think could be at risk. Is there a probability that due to optics, again, as was pointed out, we're one of the highest recipients of that fund while also being in the top 50% of wealth in the state. Do we have a risk there that we might have to suddenly find $12 million?
The quick answer is likely no, in the sense that in order to dip into the hold harmless amount, and Bob is more than welcome to correct me on this, but in order to change the hold harmless provision, state law would need to be altered. It's a part of the Chapter 70 formula, ultimately. Hold harmless is saving us here big time. It also has probably delayed this conversation for a long time, too. I mean, that number's been increasing. I've been here 9 years, and that number just keeps going up. What panics me, so unless state law is changed, there's really not a huge risk. What does worry me, and I've said this every year for many years, is that when the state has a budget crisis, and I've worked there for many years, and I worked on the education committee for 5 or 6 years, and I was there when we redid the Chapter 70 formula in 2006. 200 lawmakers up there vote on one reason. Is my district safe? Do I lose money? Do I gain money, right? And that's really hard to do in the Chapter 70 formula. What worries me in today's climate is you now see 8 months, I think, of state revenue projections not hit what they expected. And if you're a lawmaker in a district with exploding student increases, right? Some lawmakers say, well, why aren't we making a decision in the formula? I don't believe that's going to happen now or this year. I think it's a very, very low percentage that this was happening. But the community has to be aware. If you're a lawmaker in a district that has an exploding district with huge student increase, you may say, hey, wait a minute. Why is Boston hold harmless $80 million, whatever number it is? Why isn't some of that revenue coming to my town? I now have to have an override to pay for our district. And you may get some sort of deal where maybe some portion of hold harmless goes away to help compensate for districts that are seeing a huge enrollment spike. And, the reality, I think George was kind of beating around the bush a little bit, but the reality is in 2008, you had a district of 6,500 kids here, and today you got about 4,700. A third of the district has been declining enrollment. In that same time frame, education laws have also changed where there's a lot more required of us than was 15 years ago. But as the state now is having their own budget issues, which I don't know where all that's going to land in the next 2 years, the community has to be conscientious of this dynamic, because now we're actually seeing the state budget, in troubling times, right? You can obviously, it's in the paper every day, the friction between the legislature and the governor and what the priorities are and different things. Amy and I worked there for a long time. I can't predict what's going to happen, but I will say, I don't think that they're going to change the law right today. I don't think it's really hard to do it. The community has to be aware, because if that hold harmless funding somehow went away in a true budget crisis, Boston can probably still pay its bills. Boston has a lot of money. I don't know where it is, but I see buildings everywhere. Free cash is in billions of dollars. I don't know why. Here, that is not true. There is no safety net that we have anywhere close in our coffers. We just spent the last 4 years to build up the rainy day fund to $3 million, which is the highest it's ever been, and we did it to get a great AAA bond rating, which we need to keep to manage costs. But I guarantee you, Boston has way more money than that to fill their gap if they have to. Mayor Wu is one of our best friends because she is a powerful ally to make sure hold harmless funding in the state legislative formula is not changed. Every time I see her, I thank her for being her, just to make sure the relationship is really good, because those lawmakers in Boston are going to fight those hold harmless dynamics as well, because they have the most to lose. But actually, we're number 2, I believe. I don't know if we're number 2 at 12 million, according to Bob, 3 moments ago. There's no way we can patch that gap.
No.
There's no money in the bank anywhere for us to do that. That is really, really bad set of cuts to the community.
I agree with Jamie, everything he said, and I know that it's not gone for formal, legislative reform, but there have been discussions within the educational realm. MASC, which is Massachusetts Association of School Committees, is aware. We have this as an annual conversation in Franklin because it's we are number 2. I don't know how, maybe we could kill the camera, but I don't know if other communities are as in tune to this as they could create a lot of advocacy around this, because it would be a really good arguing point to make. So.
Right.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Chairman. The final thing that I have is kind of back to the idea of investing versus just churn and loss simply because. I didn't see anything up there today, and of course I could have asked yesterday and didn't think of it until now. What kind of cost is associated with replacing 20% of your staff every year?
We talked a little bit about hiring, so I'll skip that part, but the amount of time it takes to post, screen, interview. We don't interview in isolation. It's not like years ago where one person would interview and do a one-to-one. We have committees. We try to get people who have a similar role to vet applicants. We get to finalists, so that's one part. Then there's onboarding. So I just think about the amount of human resource it takes for all of our departments to then interview, onboard, then train. We have to invest in training. Teachers who are currently teaching have to mentor new teachers and use that time. And some of it's out of goodwill, but it's bandwidth, right? And when you think about the amount of people annually that you have to do that with, it's more than it's ever been. So there's that piece. We also provide formal training, professional development training. I think of the money that we receive for the civics education, right? And the civics curriculum, when I think of the training that went involved with that, we train people up, and then if they leave, it's like the investment in that has gone out the door. If we train them in any model that we have where we bring a consultant in to train our district, if they're trained in these methods and then leave, what ends up happening is you've trained somebody, you've invested in them, they're part of the professional development plan, and then if they have to leave because of a cut or a reduction, we're back at square one and we're trying to retrain a whole new crew, where the only way you get good and practice and build that craft is have sustainable time. So I'm back to that stabilization, is try to get to a place where, we've all known when you have a turnstile in leadership, when you have a turnstile in a classroom, any department, it's not good for sustainability and looking forward when you have a new person every year that you have to kind of get squared away. So there are costs associated with that come on the backs of everyone who currently is working in the district or the town.
And really quickly, the same scenario applies for us, right? If we hire a police officer, you go through a 9-month field train, you go through the academy, whatever the dynamics are, the uniforms, the costs, we do recoup some of those in the contract, but very little. And so, I would just also make a plug, Paul, while you mentioned it. We both need, but he needs especially, more central office staff to deal with these issues that you're talking about. sometimes we may not agree on all this stuff, but the way I look at it from the broader umbrella, he has one HR director. That's it. One admin assistant to manage the human resources staff for an entire district with 1,000 employees or whatever. Succession planning has been something I've been harping on for years. I understand it's a sensitive issue. I understand, but I think what Lucas has painted tonight is what some of the challenges have been for the district, not just to invest in the classrooms, which is always priority number one, but as you grow in the classrooms, you have to grow the administrative staff as well to make sure that there's not just one person managing an HR system for an entire district. I mean, it is, I'm speechless. Like, I'm in here all the time, he is, we know our staff is doing everything they can to get everything done, but when people say to me, why haven't we started the project yet for 2 years with the personnel files in the cloud? Because we're writing letters, we're in interviews, we're doing job postings, we're dealing with grievances, we're dealing with all of the work that public records requests. We're dealing with all this stuff that takes a lot of time and energy to deal with on an administrative level. As you grow, that's what happens. And I would just make that plug because the central office staff for him as well as us oftentimes work behind the scenes, and we don't think of a lot of these things. But I think the cost is enormously huge from an administrative standpoint when you're talking about a fluctuation, especially, Paul, of 20%. That's a really big, there's a huge cost there that you don't really get back.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. I think it's important for everyone to understand, really kind of the talk here is not just a matter of trying to survive, but really not to go down a pathway where if we start going down that path, we have reductions and we have to try and pull people back. We've created an environment where people are not going to stay. We're going to have those costs. That's going to eat out. We don't see any benefit from that. It's just sunk costs. Unemployment, same thing, sunk cost. And then again, I appreciate all the additional color that you two provided on the $12 million in Old Harmless. Yes, great. I'm glad that we don't have to worry about that this year.
Yeah.
Hopefully not next year. But to Lucas's point, we are outnumbered. If it's us in Boston, yes, Boston has a very strong pull, obviously, but if they had to choose Boston and us, or just Boston, we're going to lose.
Right.
So I think that is something that people really need to remember is if that 12 million comes down, and we're at this point now, we're already talking about significant cuts, $5.5 million out of the school budget. We have very, very tight budget on the town side. And again, this is all one budget. This is not one group. This is not any single individual trying to say we need this more. This is everyone coming together and saying we as a town need this money. These are the types of costs that we don't get back. These are the types of costs that we're going to have to actually eat for a significant period of time. So thank you both very much for the time. Thank you to your staffs. I know this is a huge amount of work. A lot of long nights for another long night, but I do appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Paul. Ryan?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Hi, everybody, especially to the audience. Thank you for coming. It really shows you care, and that's important right now. And I see we're losing some people, so I am going to hit on some override points. No slides, no just boom, something you can yell at someone in the coffee shop about, okay? So first of all, 87% of the school budget is salaries. And you know what that means? Where's Chief Lynch? Dollars are bodies. So if we have no dollars, Chief Lynch, there are layoffs. We lose bodies. There's no way around it, correct? Thank you for letting me steal your line. I appreciate that. Thank you for letting me steal your line.
He's got the bulletproof
And,
Better use that.
and let's talk about the kids quick. This one's for Superintendent Jagier. All right, obviously, if there's 30 kids in a classroom, that's a disaster. All my teachers can just say that out loud, okay?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Right. So could you tell me what the optimal class size should be for these kids to thrive? So I can give that back to somebody.
Well, I'm going to go to that slide where we have some recommended ranges. And you bring up a great point. So it changes developmentally, right? I think a class of 24 in a high school versus a class of 24 in a kindergarten. You've all seen Kindergarten Cop, the movie, right? Schwarzenegger's, that's picture that. So you'll see here some recommended ranges we've had You know what I'm talking about when you clap?
I'm trying not to picture Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Sorry. 18 to 22, K to 3, and that's how we based our budget model out, right, around that. 20 to 24 for high school. What we often find, we are in a position, I call it the 7-10 split of education, where you have 2 grade level teachers, and then you end up with a number like 48, and it's like 24, 24. But if that's a K class, we're already over. If we add a third, it drops you down to around 17, right? But we already know we're trying to plan in essence, we're planning in April for what we think will happen in September. And what we've learned over time is that can fluctuate. A lot of things can happen, right? We saw huge changes happened over the summer for us, right? We've seen a fluctuation in the predictability of where they land has created that problem where we have such a tight budget. We have to go in. This past year, we had to go in already knowing we're at 23, let's say. And then try to build from there, but we end up in situations where it throws up the number and then you're out of that range. So I would just tell you, as putting on my former 6th grade teacher hat, having taught classes of 21 and 28, you wouldn't believe the difference in the class dynamics, what you learn and can really know about every kid, how you can help them. And I think about, once again, that investment early on with the right class size. The idea is by the time they hit 10th grade, 9th, 10th grade, if they've had class sizes and had the teacher airtime and space and worked within a system where it's a reasonable amount of kids, the learning gaps are less, because we have people trying to do a job where once you get to a certain number, when you hit a threshold, it can detract away from how much they're able to. Once again, it's an investment. So then the supports and interventions you need later, if we could front load some of those, and Dr. Dutch talked about this yesterday, that concept of early intervention model almost. The more you can do up front, we credited one of our seniors who is a student council representative, and he gives an update, and I just talked to him about, he's a product of a system. He's not just Franklin High School. This is a kid who came through elementary and middle school and has just grown every step of the way, but had opportunities throughout his time that have put him in a position to be successful. I'm very proud of him as a kid, as a human. But if I'm thinking about the kids, we want to make sure that this age, this core group of kids that are traveling through our system, we want to make sure they have the same opportunities as the kids that came before them.
So 18 to 22 kids from K to 3, and from grades 5 to 12, 20 to 24, Councilor Chan.
Great.
Is that the accurate?
That's been a recommendation.
That's the optimum.
Obviously,
right.
That's the optimum.
That's
So,
right.
Great, so the kids can thrive with that, and the teachers can thrive with
Right.
that.
Right.
It's a package deal here.
And if you have a healthy budget, excuse me, sorry.
Yep, no,
If you have a
I'm
healthy
just trying to
budget
get it moving.
and you hit a 17, you're not sweating it like, oh my God, we have a 17 class. What are we going to do? Mr. Conley's going to see the 17. He's going to ask me about it, right? We're trying to say that you can have a 17 in a healthy budget, because that's how it shook out. But that means you have a 17 and an 18 and an 18, right? That idea? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Just playing it out. These are the things that keep me up at night.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. Joe.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the town clerk.
Thank you.
Okay, I mean, back to the override for a second. Like, I hear crazy numbers, like an election's gonna be $100,000, Brian. So if we had an override election in June, would it be 25,000, 35,000? What would it be?
So I sharpened my pencil today, really sharpened.
Good.
Mr. Conley, I will be coming to you because it's not in my budget. But I figured about 29.9.
Ooh, good number.
29.9.
Okay, that's much better than 100,000.
That was really sharp. That pencil was
And,
really sharp.
Better than 30,000 too.
It is. We'll get her another 100.
Cut where you can,
You
right?
know. Okay, so last one,
There you
Mr.
go.
Chairman, last one.
Okay.
Could have said
Now, a lot of people have come to us on the council, like, when are you getting that override number? We want to know what it is. And actually, Natalie helped me out a lot tonight, because to be level funded and stabilized, you're looking at 9.3 million, okay? Jamie, in the suitcase upstairs, has 3.1. So what does that come out to? 6.2. So that says a lot. You don't need to talk, I know you're not supposed to talk about the override, so I'm just gonna throw that number out there. That's my math. Okay, and thank you, I tried to hurry.
That's okay, thank you, Brian. And again, that, whatever that number is, that's a number down the road.
Right, well,
We're not there yet.
no, that's my math.
Yeah,
my
understood. Councilor Frangillo?
Yeah, I'll also try to hurry, but I do have some thoughts. First, just to stay positive, to frame this, how lucky are we to have so many people that care about our town so much that, and they love our town and they bought into our town, and they're happy to be here, and they just want to make it a little bit better, or as good as it can be. I think that's a really positive thing. We're going to focus, and I'm going to talk about some ways that we can be better. That doesn't mean that this isn't a fantastic community that has done really, really well for its residents. I also wanted to provide quick kudos to both Jamie and Lucas for the best budget presentation I've seen, especially to Lucas, because we know what to expect from Jamie, but especially to Lucas, which I thought that it was particularly responsive to the requests of officials and the public, and I really appreciate the time that you. Okay, I'll be the one to talk about one thing quickly. When we talk about ways to raise revenue, the easiest one is for us is an override, but the other ones that were there are new growth and local receipts. A healthy reminder that a healthy budget involves new growth, smart, responsible, but at the end of the day, growth. And so if you care about the services and continuing to have the services, you need to be a part of the conversation, not to oppose all growth, but to talk about where it makes sense. That's new revenue for the town. It splits all these raising costs amongst more people so that you don't feel as much on your pocketbook. It's more local receipts, it's more bodies that support a vibrant town. And we need to do so in a way that doesn't further add to our infrastructure expenses. Because one of the things that I think was missing here that I lose sleep over is that our public works maintenance is falling behind. A presentation in August that I'd recommend anyone check out. Over the next 5 years, if we were to maintain our roads and sidewalks to the level that we want to maintain them, that would cost $120 to $195 million. That's money that is multiples more than we're able to put to it. Our road quality, we rate our roads. We have an outside person come in and rate our roads. Our road quality continues to drop year over year. It's projected to accelerate if we fund it at the current level. So there are other things that we need to worry about, and we need to make sure that we're growing in a way that doesn't further add to those infrastructure expenses. Okay, one other macro point. I'm trying to do the macro, and then I'll get to the micro sort of questions for you all. It's easy to assume that we look, because it's an easy tool, we look at the previous budgets and then say, okay, what do we do with that new growth? And I just want to make sure that we take at least a half second to pause and make sure that we're aware that there's an assumption in there that our past budgets are products of a perfect balance of unanimous consent on that are perfectly reflective of our values, and all of a sudden you need money where when everyone else is doing perfect. That's not the case, or not necessarily the case. If for years senior center and police and fire were given 9 out of every 10 things they asked for, and schools were giving 7 out of every 10 things they asked for, and you add that up over 20 years, and then say, hey, why are you so far behind? I don't think that that's a fair framing. So I just want to make sure that we don't look at the current budget and assume that it's a perfect reflection, and anything after that is excess or changes. Okay, I say all that. I don't want to muddy the overall point too much. we, for the most part, are able to raise revenue 2.5% every year. Inflation over the last 3 years, 7%, 6.5%, 3.4%. That's costs of all of our equipment. It's costs that our employees need to pay for things in their everyday life. That alone means that we're not able to keep up with our costs. I've said it before, that the pot is simply not big enough to afford the services that we all want to enjoy, and we need to have a serious, I think it is time that we put an override on the ballot and we decide as a community if we, a continually growing, wealthier community, is able to put a little more of their dollar toward ensuring that we enjoy the quality services that we have come to know and enjoy. And we need to do so in a way that's still, aware that not everyone has had that same wealth increase over time. And so continuing to look, as we are, at low-income waivers for different fees, at creation of affordable housing options, at more innovative solutions. I think Max just took off, but progressive taxation schemes and more innovation solutions like that. Okay, those are my macro thoughts. The micro, and a lot of them have been taken up by very, very strong questions from my colleagues, so thank you for that. Jamie, facilities up 700,000. Can you add a little color to that number?
Sure. So in there is you've got about 85,000 for the sustainability coordinator. It's about 250,000 for all of the 2.5% COLA wage increases. For all the custodians, trades, maintenance, the admin staff, I'm just guessing it's about 65 folks or so that are in the facilities department. And then the rest is electricity at a 4% hike. Even at the same electricity, you've got plumbing, gas, mold remediation, all the stormwater costs, water, sewer, the basic utilities, lights, maintenance, parts. When you mentioned your inflation numbers a moment ago, there's where we're still seeing that, right? Like, even though inflation may have cooled off, if you go to the grocery store, the block of cheese is like 3 millimeters smaller than it was 5 years ago, right? Like, it's the same thing with a plumbing part. It's the same thing with what our electrician needs to do. The bag of chips went from 12 ounces to 10.5 ounces, and the price went up 15 cents. And you kind of like, wait a minute, what's the heck's going on here? That's inflation. Every business in the world is recalibrating every product they make to see if they can make it cheaper, ship products to another country, make them somewhere else. Labor costs. You look at, in the expense line item, you look at the labor costs dealing with hiring ATC to come in and do a project, or someone else to come in to actually repair one of the buildings. All of their rates have gone up, $3, $4, $5, $10 an hour, depending on what it is. And so ultimately, the fixed cost piece is a piece that has to be analyzed by this community. I think that when you're looking at capital infrastructure, you're looking at Parmenter, Kennedy, Horace Mann, and Remington Jefferson, looking at like substantially multi-million-dollar mechanical roof, playground investments in those buildings. And at some point, kind of like Davis Thayer was, I know that the declining enrollment was a part of it, but Davis Thayer's decision to be closed was also because it wasn't an adequate facility for the modern day educational profile. We've talked about this. I've mentioned it in every memo for years. At some point, we need a new elementary school. Like, not because we're growing with new kids aplenty. That won't happen. We've been talking about the demographic study recently. The town of Franklin had 7 single-family homes built last year. 7. 62 over the last 5 years total. Okay? The Franklinites that have been here for a long time, I just marks in my peripheral vision over here. The old days are gone. Okay? You are seeing more apartments. Most of these are 1 bedrooms, okay, or 2 bedrooms. That is not going to be different. So when you're looking at the school profile, the elementary school is not needed just because of population growth. but you just need a more modern facility at some point. Davis Thayer is hitting a 100-year anniversary this year. I think most people that have gone through the building as part of our open houses are saying, oh, okay, I think I see what was going on here. It wasn't just a decision based on enrollment, location, sentimentality. It was old when you were there. Right, so Parmenter and Kennedy are on the cusp of those. These are serious conversations. People have to like concede some space too at some point because they're just money pits. I mean, to Paul's point a minute ago, he hit the nail on the head. Like, you can pretend to make a decision over here, but there's a reciprocal, another cost impact around the corner that could really have a huge impact. I'm not saying that they should close or stay open. Those aren't all my calls. I'm just simply saying from a money standpoint, we have to be careful of that. When you add in facilities and DPW, Councilor Frangillo, those are the two departments that are grossly impacted by those decisions. Those are within our budget. Technically he doesn't have control over the money, but we've got to, as a community, get out of that conversation about control. Because ultimately, what we do affects their department, what they do affects ours. And facilities is probably the one department, even more than DPW, that really has a big reciprocal impact on that, right? So if you have a lot of old parts in Kennedy or Parmenter or some of the other schools that, Mr. Chairman, you may think were built yesterday, but 25 years ago, Remington Jefferson's 30 years ago. I don't need to tell anyone who sends their kids to RJ or any of the teachers or anybody in this room the issues that we've had with Remington Jefferson. The only way to get rid of the mold or some of these other issues is to deal with the drainage facilities and to deal where the water runoff comes from. That's a multi-million-dollar project. And then in beneath that, you're dealing with common everyday expenses, right? It's just the cost. I think to Paul's point, it's just the cost of doing business. So, and that 700,000 number, that's a very quick kind of breakdown. Obviously in the budget, it goes on April 12th, it'll go line item by line item, and people can see where those numbers are. But that's a general breakdown of where that increase is.
That's very helpful, thank you. Workers' comp up 11%. We didn't have the total for what that was, so maybe it's not worth asking about, but it stands out as notable. I mean, you pointed it out because it was notable. What are we
Man
falling?
after my own heart. People in the office are like, Jamie found a friend who's concerned about the 11% hike in workers' comp. Yeah,
are we falling off more ladders? Or what?
No, I mean, no. The good news is no. I'll wait for the budget narrative to come out. It is a little bit of a sting. We're trying to work. We have a safety committee that's made up of all the town departments. But there's a great example where we need to work with the schools really better on slipping on puddles or whatever is happening to make sure we're doing the proper training to make sure people aren't getting hurt. Because the 10% is probably a $70,000 hike, $50,000 hike. It's just those little things add up, right?
Yeah.
I mean, 4 or 5 of those in the budget and you're $250,000. So we do really well. We do max out on our awards. We have some awards up on the wall over there for our work on worker safety. Also, OSHA is a big part of what the future looks like because now we're required as a municipality to obey all OSHA laws. The legislature, we used to be exempt, and now it's mandated that we do, and that's a program that we're working with Tina Rogers on with the school department to try to see if we can work on them on getting some, like for example, we do chainsaw training every year at the DPW, we do snowblower training every single year, mandatory for the custodians, we do all sorts of stuff, and we really would like, the schools to do that same type of thing because it does stabilize costs as much as it doesn't.
I don't want to have any chainsaw training for.
We're not doing chainsaw.
Okay.
Some folks may want that though.
No.
Donna? No chainsaws?
But there are trainings that are applicable, obviously.
Correct.
I'm in jest, but they are applicable to the work that we do.
Yeah.
Helpful. Okay, last question for you, and then my Lucas questions. Other. Am I okay?
Yeah, you're okay.
I meant what I said. I'm not super interested, as tempting as it is to simply blindly inherit the past decisions. I want to look at what's in front of us and do the best we can with that pot. I think what we've been hearing from residents as well as what we can see in front of us is that, you know, the service that a government provides, the service that's falling the furthest behind is our schools, and you do a tremendous job of making sure that every other budget is as tight as it can be. When do we have, you know, in addition to the conversation about growing the pot, that's the most important, and I think we all agree. Within the given pot, when, if at all, how do we help you have conversations about where other services need to be brought down in order to make room for a quality school department and school services? And that sucks. I am aware of that. But
I think I've explained it in the past, and I really, really, really don't want to go back, okay? But unfortunately, the reality is a couple things. One, I've laid it out in memos passed and narratives. There were multiple opportunities over the last 10 years for the Franklin school committees of past to make different decisions than they did. And those are in the past. We're in a new normal now. We're going to move forward. But it's not like my predecessor and I didn't stand up here every year and go through these numbers exactly like they are. And when you look at the police department, you look at the fire department, DPW, for any department, even the innovation we've done at the library, okay, that Felicia can speak to. You know, my predecessor was dead set on, because he didn't have any of the revenue that we had, we've been creative with the library to get part-time positions out of the library budget and get full-time positions, and that's proven to be a return on investment that was well beyond the financial savings that we were getting from that type of strategy. We've worked with the union there on some very innovative things to be able to manage their costs. The police department's the most famous one. It took a lot of hard work to go change their entire shift schedule, you know, from a 5 to 2 to a 4 by 4. No other community anywhere near here has a 4 by 4. So if you're me, and I won't go down all the laundry list of stuff we've talked about in the past, you're being inundated with, you know, tens of millions of dollars in requests. Okay, I've said this and bloviated about it plenty of times. You know, I'm sorry. Like, at some point, when people looked at the budget last year, I know there was some accusations that there was like a retaliation from the town administrator. That is such BS. When you're me and you've got tens of millions of dollars in requests, and you're the one sitting on an island by yourself having to make a proposal to put forward, you, in my view, you have to show the community that everyone matters to some level. And with all due respect to previous school committees or other, you know, leaders in the community, if you're not making those paradigm shifts and those cutting edge decisions to change the game, like getting out of civil service for the fire department, like getting rid of all stipends in the fire department, like getting a whole, I could go down the list, right? Contracting out in the collective bargaining agreement, we had really innovative stuff in all of our collective bargaining agreements. And I would say we've got great labor peace in the town of Franklin, still on the municipal side. But when you're there and you've got this outpouring of requests of fix every sidewalk, go ahead and build it down Forest Street, go do this, go do that. I put a list up there earlier. It's really hard. And so if you're me and you're getting lobbied by the Cultural Council for more money or the Historical Commission or others, to just turn a blind eye to the Disability Commission and say, well, we're not going to give you $2,000 for a disability fair, whatever it is. I'm just using these as examples. It's very, very important in my view to make sure that those monies are being spread out. I went through it. You get $3.2 million every year. They were asking for $4 million a year before the pandemic. And we used to sit here and say, you're asking for $4 million. We've only got 3.3. I don't think that the conversation and the incredible presentation Lucas and Bob and everyone did tonight should have waited this long. We've all known this was coming. The cliff was right in front of us. We've known for years that it was there. The pandemic was actually one of the things that was one of the best things that happened because it delayed the inevitable, and we were able to use ESSER funds to get through some of those things. So I implore all of you on the board, tell me where you want to cut. Because roads, Mr. Chairman, for those of you that were around for many years, up until last year, there was no money in the town budget for roads. Zero. Nothing. Nada. For decades. I know the DPW is the only department in the town of Franklin that touches and affects every single citizen and every single property. Everyone. And to just turn blind eyes to those things is, to your speech a minute ago, it's really hard. It does suck. I agree with you on that one. But feel free to give me suggestions. And I know every single one of you that's been on these boards for years have gone through these budget hearings, and we challenge ourselves, you too, Councilor, say, where else? Where else? And I know you guys haven't found a lot of excess money around everywhere that we're just wasting or not going towards something that people haven't asked for in the community. You've said it over and over. The pie is not big enough. And up until now, and until Ruth Ann's efforts and others, the courage hasn't been big enough to go out and ask people, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to raise taxes? Are you going to force decisions to be made to try to make sure that we can still fit in all the priorities within the community? The innovation we've done at the police department is the one that's mostly out there, right? But if we hadn't done that, I can guarantee you the chief would be standing up right now asking for 6 more officers, because he'd be 6 to 8 more officers down, right? And so that's just a really, really harsh reality. And we have to have some of those uncomfortable conversations. And I really feel confident that we've got the people in place and the presentation and what Bob and Lucas and Tina and everybody's done. We got to take what we have and we've got to move forward. But I'm open ears to anybody to tell me exactly where to cut. I'm more than open to it.
That's helpful. Thank you. Lucas, you're spared because most of my questions for you.
I've never been spared at this time.
Sorry. Yeah. Spared because they've already been asked, and so it'll be. A question around the sort of the teacher compensation, which was a major cost driver, compensation and benefits, but I think. Paul had a great line of questioning around, we're losing teachers. The reason we needed to increase compensation and benefits is because we had gone from 91% retention to 84% retention in a few years. And that's key. Special education. Thank you for that. Was obviously the major question, and I feel as though my questions have been answered there. Declining enrollment and facilities conversations. I look forward to that study as much as anyone, because we need to be having that conversation more formally. My last one, and you've spoken to it a little, but if you could, if I could give you the space to maybe speak on it a little more, especially those with hair color. Thankfully, different than mine.
I'm getting there. Be careful.
Don't rub it in.
The schools that they knew are different than the schools that they see now, and there are obvious questions. The major things being that it seems as though the administrative curriculum specialist, central office, in addition to support, outside support services, seem to be growing larger than we're growing teachers. And if you could just speak to that dynamic, why is that the case? Where are we unique, if at all, in that department? Why are we the way that we are? Yeah.
So we're not unique in that department. I think that's across the board in every district that I know of or have worked in. The needs of kids, so I think we have, as enrollment has declined, the number of sections, the number of teachers has declined as well. We had graphs. I had 2 additional slides I took out because this was getting long and I didn't want to lose some of the key information and drown everybody with more data. But you may recall, some might remember last year, I had slides of basically a student profile that had a kid who has a classroom teacher who maybe receives special education services, so they get support from an educator. They might have a health requirement where there's a school nurse and other people, LPNs that we have in our district that help with an individualized healthcare plan. When you go through and travel through all the types of people that connect to a student, are ESPs, interventionists for any kid, not only students who receive specialized service. These are all things, when I think back to my time in school, it was more of a basic model. You had a classroom teacher, there were special educators, the model was different back then. We looked to, it's an expectation that we have personally, but then also, the least restrictive environment is also expected of us, and we also see the benefit of that. You try to provide that, but when you have to layer in these types of things, you have to hire more staff and have more people. Mental health supports, we've heard it in every single, any human service that's dealing with people has seen an uptick in the needs in those areas for counselors. And I think of over my time where we've tried to build up those services and supports in the school. They help all kids because they're in that building to not only help students who maybe are struggling on a day-to-day, but they're helping really every kid in those environments. The costs of curriculum has increased. The cost to do any type of business, we've heard a lot. We've heard about energy costs. We've heard a lot about other types of costs that are built in. I mean, we are facing the same types of things. So I will just tell you that what it takes to educate a kid, particularly in a town that has high expectations for how we deliver services, not just in education. We're trying to field a team that we feel like I know I want my kids to have, and I want everyone else who's in town to have as well. So I have slides on that I can share that give like the day in the life of a variety of different kids. And those are all the compliance things. I didn't even talk about preserving the wonderful things we offer, the AP courses we offer for kids, for example. Athletics. That's not a guarantee. We have that. We have a very successful, I think the boys won I've been checking out. I was wondering. So we have success in a lot of different theater. When I think of our theater arts program.
One of the best in the state.
What's that? Thank you. So, that was quick. So I think what we see is all the things that students should have as part of an experience, and you find your passion through offering electives. You know what? I want to be a poli-sci major. I want to go into that area. Where do I have opportunities? And if you don't have them, I just think about the opportunities lost along the way. Yep. So those are all built into what it takes to educate kids today and what we're aiming to do.
Well, thank you. If I could just Oreo it, and I'll give you back the mic. I am a product and a proud product of
I remember I was
school
a little
system.
darker haired.
Yeah. But I am the person that I am because I had those electives. I had those AP courses. I had dual enrollment, which existed briefly, but saved me a year's worth of college and got me a head start on my master's.
It was one of the cuts.
And all of those things I'm grateful for and would like to see returned. To paraphrase a favorite film of mine, I might have said this before, but you can't criticize a community until you love it first. And I think that this conversation is a product of love for this community. So I thank everyone for taking part in it.
Thank you, Councilor Frangillo. Councilor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to thank everyone who's here in person. And I know people left, but there's still people standing. I just want people at home to know that. On Zoom, streaming YouTube, or watching on cable, thank you for participating in this. I hope you are as inspired. I know it's kind of scary, but it's inspiring. Lucas, I think George might be skeptical, but I think you've inspired a lot of people tonight. I think it's not that I didn't believe you before, but now I can see it. I believe. It's really, to me, your enthusiasm for and your vision for what you want to produce for the children and for the students in Franklin is amazing. So a huge thank you to Jamie and Amy and Lucas and Tina, Dr. Dutch, Paula, everybody who is responsible for putting all these narratives and these numbers together for us in a different way. Like this was really I don't want to say exciting, but it was really learning, and it was, it kind of makes you want to jump out of your chair and go, let's go team. It could have been easy to put all these numbers together and these narratives together and I really appreciate everything you've done. You didn't really get a chance, Lucas, to talk about, you just touched on the portrait of the graduate, right? And that is something I think about a lot. I don't have children in the school, but I don't want the children in my community to have less, to not be able to actually become the portrait, be the portrait of the graduate that we all want them to be, right? And I agree with you that if our schools fail, everything else is gonna fail, our property values are gonna go down, it's all tied together, we are all one team, right? So it seems like to me like the portrait of the graduate guidelines, I gotta pronounce that, for the school districts are almost akin to the master plan for those of us on the municipal side, right? The documents give us a direction in the areas to focus that you so wonderfully folks mentioned today. So, but you also did mention about all the cuts that add up and how we don't like remember them because there's just so many of them. You know, when we continue to prune little pieces off of everything, I think we forget. And I feel like if we continue to do this, our portrait of a graduate will be unattainable. And that's not okay for me. Okay? I just think we need to do something. I went to the Franklin High School, Franklin Art Association gallery opening on Thursday. I mean, it was amazing. It was amazing. Right? I mean, the display of professionalism and talent was just inspiring. And I recommend if any of you haven't gone, you should go and see it. It's just incredible. The teachers that were there are brilliant. The students, they're so wonderful. It made me wonder if these seniors are the last of the students to have had all of the programs available throughout the whole system, right? Like, when are we going to see the stop of these achievements? When are we going to say, wait a minute, there's a decrease here in the achievement and we want to stop it now? Like, if we don't do anything now, we're not, I fear we're never going to be able to get it back. Because it's like,
I'm agreeing
you
with
can
you.
say something if you want to.
And I left the slide up as you were talking because
Okay,
it's
right.
all those things that you were talking about on the
Yeah.
left-hand side are on the table if we don't have a level service budget or a level service plus stabilize. And I just think that's a reality and that's not a threat and that's just a fact. You can't cover the ground we need to cover mathematically without looking at some significant program reductions, staffing reductions in all areas. So I just would agree with you. That's why I did the.
It's like righteous or something. But so I worry about that. We might be waiting too long. We've waited too long already. So I guess that's kind of my point. Like we've cut these little pieces consistently. So it's time for us to say, okay, we have a responsibility to make sure we don't get that we don't lose any more. Right? But I can't let Councilor Frangilla be the only one to talk about new growth because that is really important to me. I'm sure you're all well aware, hopefully. But so when I look at the municipal part of the narrative, right, I hone in on what we as the council can do to help increase the revenue, right? We know that we can increase taxes with a override, but what are the other tools that are available to us? How do we create a more sustainable budget, right? We could raise more taxes, but how do we keep that level? And so one of the things is to change zoning to increase new potential for new growth without adding to our infrastructure costs. I say this over and over again. Last Wednesday we had a very long meeting. It was all about this. It was very frustrating at the end for me because nobody would take a bold step and say, we want to make a difference. And I'm still a little frustrated about it, if you can tell. Look, we need to take bold steps. We have to do this. But there's one other thing that I want to mention, but Jamie mentioned it. The governor has created another tool for us, the Municipalities Empowerment Act. It needs to get passed so we can build on our local receipts. So the council signed a letter to the representatives, but here's your homework, right? Everybody that's listening right now, write to Jeff Roy, write to Becca Rausch, write to Governor Healy, and tell them you want this thing passed. We need these tools in our toolbox so we can actually increase our revenue. These are things that are really important to us. At least part of the Economic Development Committee that's up here with me tonight.
Yes.
This is our focus. It's been our focus.
I tried.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. So that's where we are, right? We're all gonna do our part. We're all gonna be bold. We're all gonna make decisions that are gonna move us forward as one, right? Everybody's together here. We've heard it all. Let's move together. Okay, and I'm gonna stop. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor Hamlin.
Got a little-
KP.
Thank you. Thank you, Jamie and team, and Lucas and team. It's a great presentation. And in terms of school perspective, I want to request the community, like when we look back at our property values, it's been increased drastically in the past 3 years. Why it is been increased? Think about this way. Why the property value has been increased? No miracle happened in the Franklin, except good schools, good curriculum, good teachers. We want to retain them. We want to keep our values. We want to keep our property values appreciated the same way it is right now. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, KB. And I'll take the opportunity, since none of the EDC did master plan. They asked for public input. Saturday, the 23rd, 11 to 3.
11 and 3.
11 to 3 at Dean College.
Alumni Hall.
Looking for help and looking for the community to come out, help us talk about new growth, help us find new ways to create revenue, because that's what we need. All right, I think everybody on the council or on the committee has had an opportunity. We've been here for 3 hours. Thank you all for your time. I guess I'll ask if there's anyone in council chambers that has a question about what was presented tonight that hasn't already been answered. Please, come forward. Name and address, please.
My name is Julio Gonzalez, 5 Lydia Lane, Franklin, Massachusetts. So my first question is, we are talking mostly about salaries. That's the override that we need, no? People. Because we think that it's an investment. It's not an operating expense. It's an investment. But not only you need people, you need also assets.
Yes.
So for example, you can hire a Nobel Prize as a teacher, but if you don't have the right lab for that Nobel Prize, it's useless, no? So do we have the assets for those teachers? Especially for the new ones. And also we have the right assets for the new paramedics, these kind of things. This is one of the assets. One of the questions. Do you want me to address another question, or?
I'm happy to answer that.
Yeah.
Or, okay. So I think the question is around, do we have the assets that the educators need to educate the students?
Yeah.
And I think through our operating budget, as Dr. Rogers talked about, how there are pieces incorporated around textbooks and some of the pieces in curriculum. We also have a capital program where we've benefited from annually putting requests for large purchases that are beyond what the budget can sustain. And an example, also an asset, is, for example, the one-to-one devices for Chromebooks, which the capital committee approved 2 weeks ago to keep up with the oldest Chromebooks that we issue to students over a 6-year period that get, basically, they've run their course and then we have to supplement. So those are the types of things that are that we use, and we use the capital program to sustain a lot of those pieces. So
So that will lead to my
Yeah. And the touch views.
my question here, next question. Do we have a strategic plan? Do we have a plan? Because I think that it's not only about this override for the next year. It's for the next, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years. Because in 1 year, you are not going to build this school system. So we need to see clear, okay, what is the plan and how are you going to measure this plan? Do we have key performance indicators, not only for the school, but also for the town? How we are going to measure the success of all this override, all the investment that we are going to do?
Yes, we do. Well, you want,
Yeah.
you want really quickly, but
So up here on the list, I put in what's not in the budget. Not in the operating budget is what it should say. And we got reoccurring capital. In terms of the assets, the gear that you're talking about, Lucas just mentioned it. We do look at the total cost. When you bring someone on, a paramedic, I'm sure it's the same thing with the educator. You look at what do they need? A phone, a laptop, you know, what curriculum, do they need tools, do they need chemistry equipment, like what is it that they need? And traditionally, we've funded a lot of this, not all of it, through the reoccurring capital program. And this has been a frustration, I think, for a lot of us. If you talk to the chief of police, just as the most high-level example, every year we're on a replacement schedule for 5 cruisers. You know, they beat them up. You can't keep them forever, right? And so we do all, the schools and the town both have a pretty meticulous plan, at least from 5 years. I have here next 5-year capital projects. We have about a 5-year window. Facilities, we have 10. You know, in the different departments, we have different like levels of what those metrics look like. Technology is one area that I really think we need to have a much more sturdy long-term capital plan of like a year, 5 years, 10 years, and really looking far out. All of that stuff is a great point, and all of those things we have struggled mightily to get into the reoccurring operating budget every year, because the police are always going to need tasers.
Yeah.
The schools are always going to need Google Classroom, whatever it is, and how do we really embed that into the budget on a reoccurring basis? Because ultimately every year, it's subject to funding. And for the last 5 to probably 10 years, our free cash has actually been decent. It's been good, and we've been able to fund these things. Obviously, I lose sleep every night when the year comes where you don't have that, and you're not able to give some of these things to the schools or us. That's a day we haven't seen yet. I don't want to see that day. I hope it doesn't come, but you know, we do continue to look at our capital plans from a 1 to 5 to 10 year process. We update them every year, and you know, with limited money, we can buy what we can buy. This year, the school's got $1 million for the, I think Lucas said, the touch screens, the Chromebooks, and the teacher laptops, curriculum, a special education van. You know, so it's there. Would they like $2 million? I'm sure. would you know, the DPW would love $3 million a year in roads, right? Like, I think to Councilor Frangilla's point about infrastructure, you know, so there's a lot of need, and we try to do the best we can to fit it in.
Yeah, but I'm talking more about a specific plan. For example, if you are going to hire a special teacher for the STEM program, it's because you are going to reinforce the STEM program or the science program.
Yeah.
This is the strategic plan that I'm talking about. For the next 5 years, we are going to reinforce this program, we are going to open this program, we are going to do this, especially for the school, no? And how we are going to measure the success of that. That's the specific plan. I don't know if we have it. If we have, I would like to have access to that. I guess that everybody.
Right.
Okay. But I think that we need to work on that, because $10 million will not give you anything, unless only for 1 year.
Right.
So you will need more.
Right.
That's the idea. So we need to see the future. Okay. So that's one. The other, and my last question, I think. And I like the last slide that you had. Do you mind with that last slide about the real burden on Franklin residents? Okay, I don't know if we have there the CPA, the Conservation...
Community Preservation Act?
Yeah. In the last 3 years, we borrowed $8.4 million for two properties. So I guess instead of asking people money to buy those properties that in this kind of crisis perhaps we don't need, why not ask people to fund the school? It's a matter of priorities.
Yeah, I mean, I think CPA is something, and I'll go back to what I said a minute ago, the Community Preservation Act. But here's the problem, and this is, we're moving forward.
Mhm.
The school finance issues have been debated for a decade. And I'm not trying to be critical, but, you know, unfortunately, the community also talked about managing growth and development for a decade. Four of these folks up here on the council during the pandemic said, you know what, we're moving forward. I remember sitting on the high school field when people didn't know what was going on in the world, and the four of them said, we're going to do it at a tough time politically where they didn't know what to do. It was a 60-40 voter margin, voted approve of it. But I think growth and development is something that Councilor Frangillo and Councilor Hanlon brought up that people have been talking about for a long time. So the CPA, well, you can say that, and I'm not saying that that's a bigger priority than schools. That's definitely not the case. But I'm going to tell you something, and this is just hard for people to hear. They had the courage to ask the community to raise that question. This is nothing against the school committee's past. They've never written a letter asking for an override. So at some point, we have to look at the school committee, and I think we have new members that are embracing that. But in the past, no one asked for it, even though myself and my predecessor, Jeff, stood up here every year saying, what are we going to do about these issues? These are hard issues for these folks. This is not easy stuff. And it's not to say one issue is a greater priority than another. But at some point, you have to have leadership that goes out to the community and that says, what are we going to do to solve this problem? And over the last 10 years, the town has invested millions and millions of dollars in one-time revenues from a power plant settlement, from the rainy day fund. The town bought out the retired teacher GIC insurance, put it in our budget. The town took over the facilities department, all to try to manage costs, to try to save their money. So there were other solutions where the schools didn't go out and ask for an override. I think we're at that point where there is no other choice but to do something about it. But ultimately, we need leaders to stand up, and I think I gave kudos to Ruth Ann earlier for at least getting this group together. This has never happened in 10 years of my working here, and I don't think that you've tried an override since like maybe 2012. 2014 was a roads, but the last one for schools was 2010, 2012? Way too long ago.
No, I understand. But my point is that.
Okay.
My point is more about in the future. We think every time that we want to raise a tax, fee, or whatever, we need to think about the holistic view for the resident in Franklin.
Yeah.
So if we are going to buy a piece of land, we need to think, okay, we are going to increase that burden on the residents.
Yeah.
So is the right thing to do right now or not? Because if you think only about the, for example, in this case, the Preservation Act is, okay, we have all the resources, the legal resources to do that, we can do this, we can ask, because it's not about the operating budget, let's do it.
Sure.
But at the end of the year, for all of our residents, is
more money out of your pockets. Absolutely.
That's the thing. So the only thing I think that, in summary, is we need a strategic plan with detail about how we are going to spend that money, how we are going to measure the success of that, and we need to think about the overall burden, tax burden, fees on the residents in the future. And thank you.
Well said.
Thank you very much.
Is there anyone else that has a question? I have to, well, sure, come forward.
I just have one question for Mel.
Sure.
You mentioned the Empower Act. Could you
Yeah.
explain it?
It's actually in Jamie's memo. It's the Municipalities Empowerment Act. It allows the municipality to raise taxes, a hotel tax, to raise it up a percent, meal tax,
Oh, different ways of.
different ways.
Okay.
Different
to
ways
allow-
that we can increase tax.
We can
There's
increase
also
our-
ways for like senior exemptions. They haven't put out all the rules yet, but like
Okay.
that may be an asset on affordability that Councilor Frangiola and others brought up earlier. There's also a lot of provisions in there that just streamline services. It's stuff that we don't want to get into, like procurement. We love that. We know that people don't. But, but for us, these are streamlined ways to make ourselves more efficient as well. There's just a lot of benefits to the whole thing, and all of it's local options.
Okay.
So there's really no reason for them not to do it, other than just not to do it, because it's all empowerment
Right,
of each municipality to chart their own destiny.
yeah.
So if I went online, I could read it.
You could Google Municipal
read it.
Empowerment Act
Okay.
and it'll
Yeah.
pop right up. to
That's
the
a
whole
good
website.
question.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, yeah.
All
I
right.
mean,
So I'll write to Becca and Jeff.
yes, please, because, I mean, I feel like it's a no-brainer to pass it, but nothing seems to be getting done, right? So that's why we need to push a little bit. Thank you.
Okay, Ruth Ann, I'm hesitating with you coming to the mic for, just because this is a subcommittee meeting. And we can't have
Quorum.
a quorum speak. And we have 3, you would be the 4th, so I'll go to Mark before I, if it's,
No.
if it's not posted
That's okay.
as
It's
a,
not super important. I just want to give Ann and Roberta credit because they got kind of interrupted, you know?
I'll be happy to.
Depends what she wants to say.
That's okay.
Basically,
That's okay.
if it's something that's within before or is going to be before the school committee, then it's a potential deliberation. It depends on the content of her comment, proposed comment.
Okay, I think going forward, Jamie, I'm gonna just
Yeah.
make a statement that with these joint budget subcommittee meetings, if you would post them as well as town council meeting and school committee meeting,
Sure.
which would then allow everybody, even if they're sitting in the audience, to speak or ask a question.
Sure.
So I don't think it's a big deal if we just post them that way as we move forward, just to legally,
We'll work with Mark on the right language.
Okay.
Point well taken, Mr.
We
Chairman.
had that problem the last meeting.
You're right.
For one of our
and,
members.
and again, I just don't want any issues, so I want to make sure that we're doing everything right. Is there anyone, please, name and address for those of us, or those that don't know who you are.
Donna Grady, and I am the president of the Franklin Education Association, and my address in Franklin is 500 Lincoln Street, or here. I have a question for the community and through the chair as well. What do you value as a community? Through the chair, please, to Mr. Chandler, you had stated that money are bodies. I fully agree, but I think, along with my union siblings in the other unions in town, what people need to understand is money are trained bodies. We can't just pull people off the street. Everybody has their specialization. Police, fire, DPW, educators, and I'm going to say educators because it's not just classroom teachers. It's cafeteria, it's van, it's custodians, it's every person who deals with children from age 3 all the way up to age 22. Jamie, I know this is going to come as a big shock to you, but I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. Sure. I think that we actually do need to look back a little bit and reflect so that we can appropriately move forward. So what did we have that supported children that we still need? Because you can't just erase the slate and move forward like everything's new. We know there are many skills that everybody needs moving forward. I have 5-year-olds that have better skills, computer skills, than I'll ever have. But we do have things in the past that are gonna benefit the children and our students in our community moving forward. Communication skills, social skills. We have to look at the sense of community. Do we have the sense of community that we want? Who helps to bring those things to our children? Dr. Griffiths, the cost to the system, as Mr. Jagier said, I'm going to tell you that it's huge. And one of the reasons it's huge, when I was hired in Franklin, a gazillion years ago, we had 75 teachers hired the year that I was hired. Most of us are still here, 25 years later, but Franklin was the place to be as an educator. Everybody wanted to come here. For every spot, we had 2-3 applications. That is no longer the case because of the unstable budget, because of the turnover. We used to train people, and then we kind of became the training grounds, and other systems would go, yay, Franklin educators. We want the system to be what it was. And the only way we can do that is to support the community that is coming here. Because educators aren't sending their resumes here anymore, because it's too unstable. What I would say is that it is not, I've said this before, it is not a badge of honor to do more with less. But there is one pot or pie that needs to be made bigger, and our budget reflects what we feel morally needs to be done for our community. So again, I ask you, is your community and your children, are they both important enough to fund them appropriately? And it's not one department over another, it's a joint effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in council chambers that has a question that hasn't been asked or explained? Okay, is there anyone, you have two. Amy, since I can't see that far.
I can't either.
If you'd let three, if you'd let the first one in.
It's Dan Saunders.
Dan, can you hear us? Mr. Saunders?
Does he have to unmute or do you have to unmute?
I unmute him and then he has to accept.
Dan, can you hear us? No. You want to try someone else?
Sure.
We'll come back to Dan.
Jane Calloway Tripp.
Jane, can you hear us?
I wonder if they have to try on that.
I think we can't hear that.
Yeah. Test, test, test.
Apparently on Zoom, they can hear people talking, they just
Oh, good. So it's a radio, it's a booth there. So if
It's
they
a
can hear
booth?
on Zoom, that's all working.
Okay.
It's just not coming through. Is this, that's not right?
No. Yeah, we'll get an echo. Chris, can you hear him in there?
No, and I'm not muted, so. Want me to see if I can open up Zoom and just kind of put it to the mic?
Sure, sure.
And then I put a question through chat.
Oh, we could do chat or we could do transcript. Don't you?
That's it.
We can hear you, Jane.
Oh, you can hear me? Yeah, we got
Okay.
That's okay.
Where's it coming from now?
Accept questions via chat.
Yeah. Let's see if they can ask their questions via chat.
Actually, we just.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
heard
okay.
him.
Just barely.
Wanna put this,
Put a mic.
put your mic up.
Yep.
Kobe, where? Where?
I didn't actually see. I was told.
Oh.
Somebody just relay what she says.
Was there somebody over here that had a question? Please come forward while we're trying to name and address, please.
Daniela Bush, 21 Tangula Drive. My question was just about overrides. I'm not familiar with how they work, but I know we have a lot of people on fixed incomes and lower incomes. Is there any way for an override to be written in such a way that it allows for people who are on fixed incomes to be affected, not be as heavily impacted? Is that a possibility?
I'll let Jamie has that answer.
I love delivering bad news.
Yeah.
That's what I do.
Unfortunately.
And I'm the guy that has to say the word no all the time, so unfortunately there is no way. Yeah, it's applicable across the spectrum
Across
to
the board.
everybody.
Yeah.
Good
It's a
question.
great question.
But a good question.
Fantastic question.
Are they able to chat? I don't want this to go too much longer.
Yeah.
Could they email you questions?
It might not be savvy. Might not be savvy enough. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't.
They're getting there. They're getting there. So weird. Yeah, you can tell they're talking. It's not coming
They
through.
can hear each other, but it's not coming
No,
through.
but they're talking. You can see them in the mic and they're doing their thing. It's just not coming through. Well,
Okay, we'll give this another minute,
Yeah.
and then we're gonna
Yeah.
have to move on.
oh yeah.
I would say just ask Dan Sanders to say.
Yeah, so it's coming through transcript.
Okay.
So Dan and Jane and Megan can say what their question.
All right, Dan, would you speak your question into your microphone, and it's coming through as transcript to us, but we'll see it and try to answer it for you. So, Dan, why don't you try first?
Okay, so Dan is saying, okay, first is a statement of one of those things on the Municipal Empowerment Act and also the excise tax to motor vehicles by 5%. That's correct, Dan? Mhm. Yep.
Okay,
The
repeat his
question is, so number one, Mr. Saunders was just also making a plug for the point that Melanie had brought up earlier about the Municipal Empowerment Act has 3 or 4 different revenue options in it. And then he's also asking whether or not ESSER funds, if the money that's drying up, was there any way or any consideration in the FY25 budget that those positions would stay in any context that were funded through ESSER funds in the past? Personnel. So if personnel were funded through ESSER funds in FY24,
Yeah.
are any of those staff staying on board in FY25, despite the fact that ESSER funds So maybe you could answer what positions those are that are carrying over despite the loss of ESSER funds. That's a good question.
Yeah.
Oh, now he's on stools.
You didn't get that in Situate.
No, no. So I'll answer the question in a general sense without specific positions. The ESSER fund positions in FY24 were primarily interventionists, adjustment counselors, guidance counselors, and those are funded in the FY25 budget, included in the level service plus that you're seeing at 12.96%.
Perfect. Thank you, Bob. So was that the last of Dan's questions? Amy?
Were those positions in the ESSER funds last year, were they sustained or were they created through the ESSER funds?
That's a good question.
That's a great question.
Yep, they were.
Those were new positions that were added into the budget.
Okay.
And that was based on the need of students as a result of the pandemic.
Right.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay, he said thank you.
Okay.
So 1 down, 2 to go.
Okay, Jane next, if you would just speak your questions and we'll get the transcript.
Yep, it's going through. We cannot hear you, Jane.
We can't hear you, but we can hear we can read your transcript. So just talk, and we'll read it after you talk.
Couple quick questions. You can read the question.
I think so, yeah. It's a question about lump sum payment for summer versus when they get laid off. So,
We do need to repeat the question so that,
basically, what I think I read was, if a teacher's laid off, the question came back to layoffs.
Right.
That there's, it's Ms. Callaway Tripp's understanding that you can choose to have payments spread out over the course of a year, or have them with a lump sum in at the end of the school year for the rest to make you whole.
So the teachers have the option of taking their salary over 22 pay periods, which would get them paid at the end of June for the full year, and they wouldn't receive anything until they returned in September. The other option is that they would be paid over 26 pay periods, in which case they would get still be getting a lump sum. They'd be paid through through August, so that they'd continue to get paid through the summer. Regardless, as it relates to unemployment, once the school year is over, their contract is up at the end of June, and they'd be eligible for unemployment as of July 1.
Okay. Second.
is that okay?
Mhm.
We do apologize for the technology snafu here.
No, I see what she's asking.
Okay,
So Jane, I understand. So Jane's question is pretty straightforward. She's basically saying if you're $18,000 per student in costs, and you're down enrollment 100, 125, 150 students, that should be a savings in the budget because that per pupil expenditure, you're not providing a service to somebody. And I think Jane, to some degree, you're accurate. Just to kind of cut to the chase and get on with the night. Happy to answer your questions offline. But you are correct, and I think the schools would validate this too. They have actually been balancing part of their budget for years on the fact that at times there has been declining enrollment, and that has reduced your need to
Correct.
expend money. So Jane, we're on the same page on that one. It's been a trend for over a decade.
We've kept up with the enrollment-based reductions as they've occurred through that time with regard to classroom teachers to the degree we can. When the budget has not been able to be fully funded, we gave examples on kindergarten class sizes of 24 because the amount of money coming in is not, it's less than we can keep up with, which is why we're having a conversation around a larger pie tonight.
Okay,
Right.
thank you. And who's the third one?
Megan's the last one.
Okay. Megan, if you would just speak to your question, please. That's coming from somebody out in the audience. Glenn, can you turn that down, please?
She's got a question basically for Nancy. I think it's a pretty quick question actually. Is a special election was $30,000, $29,999.
$29,900.
I know. And is that cheaper or more expensive than doing it on an already scheduled election?
So the next scheduled election is in September, and then we have one in November. Is it cheaper? Sure. I mean, the state's going to pay for the ballots. We don't have to pay for the ballots.
Yep.
Basically, that's the only savings. We still have to pay for the employees. We still have to pay for the vote by mail. We still have to pay for in-person early voting. So a little bit cheaper, yes. Maybe, I'm gonna say $11,000, $12,000.
Yep. It's about half.
About half.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay? That's it? Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank Jamie, Lucas, and your entire teams for a great night of a lot of very good information. I want to thank everybody who came out this evening and sat through this 3.5-hour meeting. I think there was a lot of good information that was brought forward. Again, this is just the beginning. The process moves forward from here. As both Jamie and Lucas alluded to in their presentations, as we move forward, the school committee will be voting on their budget April 2nd. Jamie will be presenting his budget on April 12th.
It'll be released on April 12th, yep.
Released on April 12th. At that juncture, I believe I would call another joint budget subcommittee meeting to review the presented budget at that point. And I think that's really when we probably would be able to get into discussions about, again, as Jamie alluded to, the school committee at some point will bring forward or send us a letter requesting X amount for an override to be held when?
As soon as possible, sir. No.
But I just want everybody to understand, that letter will come in to the council as a request.
Right.
The council then will review that request. That number, the council may decide on a different number. The council may decide on a different date. The council may agree with the number and the date. That's something that will happen later on down the road. Probably the second meeting in April is something that I've spoken with the town administrator and asked him to leave some time on that agenda out, just in case that is, works time-wise for us, for the council to have that discussion. We have other things on the April 10th, plus he won't be releasing the budget till the 12th. So I would say to the people sitting here, the people listening, that it's important for you to be here tonight. It's also important for you to be there during the school budget hearing, during the town budget hearing, during our next joint budget subcommittee meeting, because that's when we will start fine-tuning this down. And as Jamie alluded to in his revenue presentation, you know, the number as we walked in here tonight was 10-1. We already know that the health insurance is changing. These other things are changing, so that number is going to be coming down. And by the 12th, we'll have what that number is, and then we'll have the discussions moving forward from there. Jamie, is there anything I'm missing?
I think we've covered it all.
I think we've done a good job of covering a lot. A lot.
This is really great.
And again, Lucas, applaud the efforts of the school committee, your administration for bringing forward really an informative plan that was something that we all could sit here and understand. And I think that's something that's been missing, and it's here. It was very helpful, and thank you for that. And I know somebody wanted me, or we should thank Roberta Trahan and Ann Bergen for their work. And they initially started the override discussion many moons ago, 2019, I think.
Yeah.
Before COVID, and then COVID hit right after they started the discussion. So we've come a long way, but I think we're in a good spot. So with that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Non-debatable. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I feel like we just won the overlap. That's what I want. I know. Like I just feel like such a